Controversial rapper and actor Tupac Shakur has died in a Las Vegas hospital.
Rap star Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G., was shot dead by a drive-by gun.
Someone had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying these guys are living like drug dealers.
Yo can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they can fully breathe a sigh of relief.
He's dead. That person's dead. And everybody feels comfortable with the fact of that. When I say everybody, I mean whoever set it up.
They're not going to rest until Suge Knight is dead or in jail.
It was a setup.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Tupac Amaru Shakur. I started off with poetry, writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But
like junior high, high school?
Yes,
okay.
Junior high school. And poets I saw were like looked on as like wimps. Mm-hmm. So I did that personally, but then I started turning the poetry into songs.
From the moment that I met Tupac at the age of 17, he was one of the most startling individuals I've ever met. He was, and still is, just one of the most amazing voices. I love Pac instantly.
It's how you raised. We weren't raised barricaded, although the FBI was always lurking around and all of that, but you still went about your business. The kids still played outside. When they came upstairs and ate dinner. The only lock on the door was your police bar in New York and your little lock. But you weren't standing at the window with guns. That's not what his life was. It may have been others, but it wasn't his.
He became like my little brother, actually. I work with many different artists, but he's the guy who invites you to your home, who you talk to, late at night. He was just very easy to know for me. I kind of feel like he was that way with many more people, which is why he's so missed, because when people met him, they really got a chance to get a piece of him.
Months and months I kept talking about needing a young artist that had a voice that could translate and cross all boundaries.
Tupac was one of those guys who said what was on his mind.
Plenty of days and night, the brother, he kept a smile on us. We kept joking. He was one of them guys that had a personality that he wasn't always serious. You know what I mean? He could be going through the worst things in court and things like that, facing the worst things in his world, but he always kept a smile on his face. He always, he always kept us laughing.
It is of my opinion that I was rapping while I was writing poetry.
Okay.
And so I was into rap, I guess you could say, from junior high when I wrote my first poem.
I fought a lot of people around me, because Pac, when he was so young, he was already a contradiction in so many ways, externally and internally, and he lived out loud. So nothing surprised me. He was so in your face.
Pac really down to earth. He was a good dude. He had good intentions, you know what I mean? It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes in these streets, it can mislead us and have us doing and going the wrong way, you know?
A lot of people nowadays like to say Tupac was loyal, but Tupac was really only loyal to Tupac. He was loyal to what he wanted.
What my and Pac's friendship and love was about making shit happen.
If you could ride with that, he was fine with it. But if it was something that you couldn't ride with, he would move on. Or if you did something he didn't like, or if you didn't give him the attention that he thought he needed at that particular time, he was done with you. He might just be done with you for the night, but he was done with you at least for that night. And then he may reconsider the next morning, and you guys would be fine. But that's just how Tupac was.
Mm-hmm. And after I heard on the radio that there were other poets who made records and they were selling and it was working, then I decided to change the method of my poetry.
We had Los Angeles police officers working within the organization, Compton police officers working within inside the organization. Their badges stopped us from getting to the truth.
No one is above the law. This is a fundamental principle in our society. And when it is violated, it's the job of the Department of Justice to step in and hold individuals accountable.
The 51-year-old deputy chief is now facing federal charges of selling drugs. 3 drugs in particular: oxycodone, heroin, and marijuana.
In a 3-year investigation, which San Francisco police officers have been indicted. All the officers were put on administrative assignment, taken off of any street. Certain officers, because of the seriousness of the allegation, were disarmed.
And unfortunately, in this particular case, we had to take 3 police officers who were sworn to uphold public safety off the street. From my point of view, I'm battling the Mexican cartels in Chicago. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this. Now I got to worry about this.
Turn it off. I just enjoyed the fringe benefits that came with a credential. Nightlife, the party life, the rubbing elbows with the powerful in Juarez and Chihuahua. When I was with the feds, there was this, one guy. This happened after the Pablo Acosta incident. We were doing a job. One of the other agents had a case and we were called in to help him. And we went into this house, a real nice house. I turn around, there's a bag, a paper bag, grocery bag. And I look into it and there was piles of money in it. And inside that same bag, there was many bags of ounces of cocaine. If I would have been smart, I would have kept it. But that wasn't my, that wasn't my thing. It was share alike. So I gave that money to the person in charge of that job. And some other agents were sent wrecking, they were taking everything. They were stealing everything. And the person I gave the money to stole the money. He never reported it. So I came back home that night. I get a knock. And I walk out and it was 2 of the commandant's right hands. The commander found out about the money and they turned around and blamed me for it. I was tortured. The same thing we did to the criminals was done to me. And the one pointing the finger, blaming me, was that same guy that was taking everything from the house. As I was, the first time as they tied my hands, my face, giving me water, shocks. When they started beating me up, the commander was accusing me of being a DEA agent working in Mexico. That was the only time I had that problem. This was the commander talking. The first night I went in there, they asked me, "Where's the money?" I gave the money to him. The guy gave the money and said, No, you didn't. And since he was the commander's right hand, he believed him more than me. So they took me into his office. They handcuffed my hands. They tied my legs. They put me on the ground. They shoved a rag up my mouth. They put a handkerchief on my face and gave me the water treatment, mineral water with pepper powder. My father gave $20-some thousand to him. They called me. They pulled me out of the cell. And he took me into an office. The commander turned around and he cursed at me for a while. And he turned around and told my father, I tortured him. Ain't shit he can do about it. I was pretty messed up. It was after 30 days. My face was swollen. My body was hurting. My bad beard. My hair was all messed up. I remember crossing the bridge and the guy at the port of entry just looked at me and said, "You okay?" "What's wrong with you?" Nothing, kept walking.
In the mid-1980s, the cocaine trade had sort of shifted from Miami, because a lot of law enforcement there, to Los Angeles. As the volume of cocaine cases and frankly the volume of cocaine per case started to grow and grow, the sheriff's departments selected some of their best narcotics officers to be what they called their majors crews to go after the big, significant, large-scale narcotics distributors.
The majors units at the LA Sheriff's Department were Majors 1, Majors 2, Majors 3, and Majors 4. Operation Big Spender was an epic announcement to discover and ferret out and punish corruption by elite law enforcement officers.
It started because some of these sheriff's deputies who were putting their lives on the line every day, as they would seize money, they at some point came up with the idea of taking a little bit of the money to try to get better equipment to help them do their jobs. Over time, it morphed into maybe people were going to lunch that day from the unit, so they would take some of the money from the kitty, as they called it, and they'd use it for lunch. And then a little later on, it might be the weekend, and they were all going out, and it's like, hey, let's take a little money from the kitty for when we go out.
Here's a good example. The time we took the Armenians down, and we have $1 million in cash in 5s, 10s, and 20s spread through all of our desks. They wouldn't let us use the money counter, so we had to do it by hand. We ordered pizza, and so we're all digging in our pockets, trying to come up with enough to pay the pizza guy, and he's looking at us like we're crazy because here's $1 million spread out all over these tables.
And then before you know it, as time progresses on, and certainly by the time of the majors teams, forget the kitty. When we seize money, let's just take some.
The predication came from drug dealers.
Later on, we find out that not only had they been planting drugs on my guys, but they had been planting drugs and lying on the witness stand and fabricating search warrants for a lot of other people.
Too many drug dealers came forward and spoke to officials and created a buzz where similar, if not identical, scenarios of, hey, it's all the same to me, but just so you know, they reported $50,000 seized from me. I had $100,000 in cash.
They basically put away the gang thing and became people that had organizations, and like Whitey's World, Way Out World, World on Wheels, Cobra Enterprises. These were all African American gang members that had narcotic organizations that made millions of dollars.
A bunch of my guys had been getting drugs planted on them when they didn't have no drugs, when they wasn't selling drugs, and I wanted to find out who these cops were that was doing this.
Ricky Ross was a legendary drug dealer, but so were a lot of people in L.A.
They was taking the drugs from one person, planting them on another person, and selling them to this person, and just a criminal enterprise.
Sometimes it happened invisibly to the drug dealer, but sometimes it happened right out in the open, where a seeming confidence had developed among the detectives. Nobody's going to believe this person. At some point in, I think, 1988, someone had had enough of seeing this, and there was an anonymous letter sent to law enforcement saying, these guys are living like drug dealers. You need to check them out. They're spending money like drug dealers, they have money like drug dealers, and they're living the life of drug dealers. That led to a lengthy and exhaustive investigation culminating in a sting where they actually had a wired up, videoed up hotel room with plant alleged drug money in, I think, 1989, and they actually caught members of the Majors 2 sheriff's unit stealing money. Thieves doing the thieving live before your eyes.
Yeah, taking a 20, nobody had ever known, but it was something that, in me, that I would have never been able to sleep. I would have been waiting for them to come and knock on my door and take me away for taking $20 from a dirtbag dope dealer with $1 million. The sergeant on that crew, a guy named Robert or Bob Sobel, wound up flipping or cooperating, and then he testified in the first trial, and because of the information he gave and later others, the investigation spread to the other major narcotics crews. You didn't have to do very much persuasion that there was something rotten here, because you can see it, as well as study financial records. You could see thievery occur.
On the one hand, you have Operation Big Spender and the Los Angeles County Sheriffs being prosecuted, and on the other side of the fence, you have the city of Compton.
Of course, it's not uncommon. You can take any large city or medium city or a relatively small city like Compton with a population of approximately 100,000, and you're going to be able to identify in its historical record there was corruption.
There were no lines that people of power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
Virtually every town that has a 19th century origins in Southern California started out as small agricultural colonies. But Compton was unique in that it was early on the settlers decided to incorporate. Los Angeles at the turn of the century is an emerging city. It's still not even in the top 100 cities of the United States in terms of population, but it's on the make. And just south of Compton is Long Beach.
These families have been here 40, 50, 60 years. And so everyone knows everyone.
You know, if you got caught breaking into somebody's house in the neighborhood, you got a problem. If you stole from somebody in the neighborhood, you got a problem. And if you were from outside of the neighborhood, they're going to check you out until you leave here.
So for African Americans coming from South Central Los Angeles, which was increasingly congested and deteriorated housing, for those middle class African Americans, they viewed Compton as nirvana. And whites are moving en masse so quickly, I refer to it rather than white flight as white exodus. By 1970, Compton is an African American majority community, and by the early 70s, the first community this side of the Mississippi River entirely run politically and administratively by African Americans.
So there's not a neighborhood that we're going to go into, be it Crip or Piru, that if they see my face, they're not going to stop and say, Omar, Omar.
Compton, through the 70s and 80s and 90s, enters a really trying, challenging, difficult era. You had whites move out, and they took their businesses with them. So the tax base, with all of the banks gone, in fact, downtown Compton is bulldozed. As that happens, the infrastructure of the city begins to decline.
Now these rough streets are because I'm no longer mayor.
Now, you introduce a cheap drug, crack cocaine, that with a rudimentary gang structure, that if it expands and becomes business-oriented in the underground economy, can make a hell of a lot of money.
I was captain of the fucking football team, AB student, magnet. Shit, we out there getting it. Fucking with this nigga and my brother, so we have a super long ring. It's ridiculous. I ain't having no problem. 450 SL. Niggas in the 10th grade.
And for kids that can't find jobs otherwise in schools that are deteriorating, they're having trouble staying in schools, you can make quick money, a lot of money, if you do the selling of drugs connected to gangs.
I sold drugs because I was running from poverty. I didn't like being poor and broke. You know, I didn't like not having food in the refrigerator. I didn't like for the light man to be talking about cutting my mom's lights off.
Suge Knight was a very powerful individual. He had connections with the Compton mayor, and he had access to just about the entire Blood gang.
Death Row Records. Death Row Records.
Death Row.
Death Row.
Death Row Records. Death Row.
Death Row. Death Row Records.
This is Michael Harris, a man drug agents describe as a major cocaine trafficker.
Yeah, I knew Michael Harris. Yeah, he was trying to put together his wife's album, and matter of fact, we were cellies at the time.
Harris, identifying himself as original organizer and owner, names him as an equal partner in Death Row.
I told him that he should have Dr. Dre produce a song for him. And that's how his thing with the Suge and the Dre and all started transpiring. I met Suge in MDC.
Harris's complaint also names criminal defense attorney David Kenner as the company general counsel and organizer.
Harry O and a couple other guys in there that was running for David Kenner. You know, that was their game. You hire David Kenner and they get a kickback. I was there when he first told Kenner about the music business as well. Harry O told David Kenner that he would make him more money in the music business than he ever made doing law.
What's up, boy? What's going on, homie? Doing a documentary.
Corruption exacerbated things as prominent political figures were identified, often with a federal investigation of corruption on a variety of charges. You had some high-ranking people like U.S. Representative Tucker taking some bribes from a company, I think it was a rubbish company or a reclamation company that was come into Compton and given favored status, and the FBI investigated, and then over a course of time found guilty.
Did the city council meet in August?
No.
And yet our producer found that you were being paid in August.
Probably so.
Why so?
Tradition.
Just to be honest, I was really naive. I have worked in politics at a lot of different levels. I have worked in the White House. I've worked on 5 presidential campaigns. I'd been a deputy mayor. I'd been on State Board of Education. Worked on a number of mayoral campaigns and gubernatorial campaigns. I had never encountered politics like I encountered in Compton.
Ben Austin worked in the White House, so he's seen politics of all kinds. They've got to be pretty bad.
Our research shows in 2012, the city council members earned $39,000 each for serving on 4 commissions, which met for a total of 26 hours. That shakes out to $1,500 per hour.
Compton was just the Wild West, and there were simply no rules. There were no lines that people of power in Compton were unwilling to cross to defend their power. No legal lines, no moral lines, no ethical lines. I just found that it was the Wild West.
What commissions are you on?
All of them.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite? No.
Well, what's one of them?
I'm just serving on the ones that's on the books. So that's it was CRA, it was public finance. You caught me back.
In nearby Huntington Park, council members make less than $15,000 a year. Ditto over in Maywood, the politicians there make about $6,700 a year. And in affluent Huntington Beach, council members earn about $16,000.
And the rules of engagement, the normal rules of engagement, do not apply.
Do they do anything?
Well, they listen to the audience comments, and then they may comment on that.
And then they decide something? It's just...
There's nothing to decide.
So the people that came into power hired their cousins and their uncles and others into the jobs, especially in the school district, right, which was the largest employer for city residents. But in 1993, the state does something unprecedented. It takes over the Compton School District. State had never done that before.
School board president announced during a debate about this that we just need to accept that all children are not going to succeed.
All kids are not going to make it.
That's just the opening salvo. That was their basic premise from which they were operating. And everything else flows from there.
And the board, sometimes we don't even know what's going on.
I mean, the words that were spoken in Compton...
I gave you your 5 minutes. There will be no more speaking.
And the actions that were taken were, in my mind, in an alternate universe. And like I said, I had come there having worked in the White House and on 5 presidential campaigns.
All kids are not going to make it.
And I had never seen anything like this.
Adult issues are important.
So you have, in that period of the late 80s through the late 90s, this mountain of scandals in the school district, in City Hall, in the representatives to Congress from the city.
I was at an education conference in San Diego, and I saw across the hall a former superintendent of Compton. He just happened to be there. I remember it was yesterday. He turns to me and he says, "You're a crazy motherfucker." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, when I was superintendent of Compton, the mayor called me one day and said that I needed to sell a parcel of land to a developer friend of his. And he said, that he refused, that he wasn't going to do it. So soon after that, a school caught on fire. And a couple of days, a week later, another school catches on fire. And then it happens again. And so he called the fire chief. Or the police chief, I don't remember which. And he said, "When is this going to stop? What's going on here? We got a huge problem." And he said, "The fires will stop when the mayor says the fires will stop." They were essentially doing this eyes wide open. They'd done a report on themselves. They learned that the schools were not performing well because of affirmative decisions they were making and didn't make any changes. And that was, for me, a real poster child for an educational system that is fundamentally designed to serve the needs of adults, not the needs of children.
Adult issues are important.
Kids in McKinley are 50 times more likely to drop out of school than to go to college. Right. I mean, that's a huge concern, and especially for these parents that want their kids to succeed like any parent does. And so first thing, they want to get their kids out of this school district.
I founded an organization called Parent Revolution. And we invented a new law called the Parent Trigger Law. The law says that if half the parents at a failing school sign a petition, they can bring in new staff, they can bring in new leadership, they can convert their school to a charter school, or they can use the law as leverage to bargain. But it wasn't until we turned the petitions in on December 7th that the blowback really began. They mapped the networks of the school and figured out the children of the parents who signed the petition. And for the children of the parents who signed the petition, these are elementary school kids. They wouldn't let the children, when they were at school, they wouldn't let them go to the bathroom. They forced the children to pee in their pants. And when they did, they were sent to the nurse's office. And the nurse was in charge of the rescissions. And so the nurse would call in the mom to bring clean underwear in. And as the mom was changing their child's underwear, the nurse would ask her to sign a rescission petition.
And I just want to make this statement. When Omar had the city with a surplus, had the murder rate drop from 100 a year down to 20 by bringing in the sheriff and getting rid of the corrupt Compton PD.
And now we see that the corruption that's passed from the city government and the corruption that's infected the schools is now passing its way down to the Compton Police Department. But you have to ask yourself this question. The entire Compton Police Department was disbanded. What does it take to disband an entire police department?
In order to disband an entire police department, things have to be so bad and so corrupt that there's no other alternative, such as maybe bringing in a new police chief, new police administration, or something of that nature.
They envied Compton streets when I was mayor. I used to get on the radio and laugh at them because they couldn't figure out my formula.
It has happened on occasion where the entire municipality has been dissolved. The bottom line is things have to be pretty bad before that happens.
I had personal interaction with them working the gang detail from 84 to 90. We didn't share a lot of information with them because of the city government was known to be corrupt, and the police department had a stigma of not being on the up and up. It was like shoveling sand against the tide.
You'd hear over and over again that the Compton cops were on the payrolls of the gangs. Initially, when the word that cops were working for Suge was out, was that basically they were provided with intelligence. But also when cops, when there'd be a clear street and there wouldn't be any cops around.
Now, one of the things that the former mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley, told us was that there actually wasn't a difference between Death Row Records and the city of Compton.
They've always been the same entity. That's what you don't get. The city attorney's nephew or cousin is Snoop Dogg. The city manager's son is A&R. The head of homicide's son is vice president, head of security. The other chief of police that I bring in to replace Yuri, his daughter got $1 million contract with them.
They reached out to the Los Angeles County sheriffs to see if the sheriffs would be interested in policing Compton.
In police work, in law enforcement, there is so much duplication of services. They overlap, and a lot of times eliminating a police department really doesn't harm the public because another department can come in and take care of it.
The way this actually worked was the FBI walked into Omar Bradley's office one day because a Long Beach police officer had been shot with a gun that had flowed through the Compton police evidence locker. And so the FBI wanted to know if Omar Bradley was in on it. And Omar Bradley said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And that led to an investigation into the Compton corruption that was happening. When they start this investigation, they come in and they find the evidence locker is just a mess. The inventory hasn't been done in years and years and years, and Chief Ori Taylor is suspended.
A group of those cops, sort of an elite group of those cops, were actually like a criminal gang.
And we're not talking about just casual trips down to the locker. We're talking about 172 unaccounted for visits.
And they ask Ori Taylor if they can start looking into the lockers, and Ori Taylor is pacing back and forth. "Oh, I don't think I have a key, and I don't think the key's around." And he seems like he's nervous and he's upset. And so the investigator pulls out bolt cutters and just cuts off the lock to Ori Taylor's locker. And inside they find 2 kilos of cocaine in the police chief's personal locker. And Ori Taylor all of a sudden decides he doesn't want to be there, and he leaves the police station.
And Ori Taylor gestures to his attorney as he's running up the back stairs to follow him up there, and that's the last they see of Ori Taylor.
Cases were being rejected by the DA's office, and the Compton police were actually keeping the evidence. And a lot of that evidence was being kept in the evidence locker, and then when they actually go to look for the evidence, it's missing. Compton was a very corrupt city, and the police were trafficking narcotics, using the evidence locker as their warehouse.
So that's how they paying them. But you got to understand, we give you the dope, you give us a business deal. So our money looks good because our money's coming off this business deal. But where's their money coming from? Coming from the dope coming out the evidence line. And the guns, 2,300 guns missing. 140 gallons of PCP.
I mean, money laundering is if you take drug money and you go buy a car, you just laundered that money. If you go buy clothes, you just laundered that money. That's a small scale.
They started calling people in one at a time. Nobody was taking the rap for what was happening and all the corruption, and they were blaming other people. There was an awful lot of finger pointing. They were also trafficking in stolen guns, and a lot of those guns were going into the evidence locker and then finding their way over to a gun shop in Compton.
City clerk, he owns part owner of the gun shop. ATF, FBI, Homeland Security,
And Baca.
All went, about 400 people went in there to get all the guns out. They had to bring up a big rig to get all the shit together.
There's no coincidence that the Compton police corruption report happened at the exact same time that we had the Rampart scandal. And so you have this pattern that includes actually the DA's office in the missing cocaine, but nothing ever happens. And you have an assistant district attorney who refuses to prosecute Corey Taylor, but then turns around and is the one that was pursuing Omar Bradley the entire time Omar Bradley had his corruption trial, which was eventually overturned. But even after it was overturned, the assistant district attorney kept pursuing Omar Bradley.
Within 3 years after Omar Bradley is defeated as mayor and Eric Perrodin takes over, fellow prosecutor Terry Bork presses charges against Omar Bradley for corruption as it applies to credit card charges. Yet when those same credit card charges that are made by Eric Perrodin are presented to Terry Bork with the question as to whether or not that's actually corruption, Terry Bork says that even if he found that those credit card charges were corruption, he would not prosecute Eric Perrodin.
Reggie Wright Sr. is in charge of narcotics at the Compton Police Department. And so they bring him in for questioning. And Reggie Wright Sr. Immediately starts talking about how, you know, even though he's the man that's in charge and the responsibility really stops with him, that he doesn't ever make any decisions. And so they really shouldn't be looking at him. They should be looking at the guy under him and the guy over him. Everybody is pointing to other people to blame for the malfeasance that was going on in the department.
Now, it looks like the time in the Compton police report that Reggie Wright Sr. was actually in charge of both the narcotics and the gang units was about a year. But prior to that, he had been in charge of the gangs. And who deals the drugs? The gangs.
The Compton Police Corruption Report is a 95-page document. So when it was decided that they were going to shut down the Compton Police Department, a lawsuit was filed.
One of the things that struck us immediately was that there was a handful of people in the Compton Police Department that were just not satisfied with the Compton Police Department being closed.
It was heard before a judge. They tried to do everything they could to block this from being shut down. And the judge heard the case, they had their day in court, and the judge allowed them to shut down the Compton Police Department.
Even though Omar Bradley had been successful in shutting down the corrupt Compton Police Department, what do you think was the first priority on Eric Perrodin's agenda? Restarting the Compton PD.
The whole notion of I am my brother's keeper doesn't exist over here. This is dog eat dog.
So what you have here is a real dilemma for the Compton Police Department because it's sort of like a vice. On the one hand, you have the Operation Big Spender and the sheriffs and everybody that's surrounding the city of Compton being investigated for corruption as it relates to the drug trade. And on the other side of it, you have the Justice Department and the Drug Enforcement Agency coming down on death row records and looking at death row records for money laundering as it relates to drug sales. So where is in the middle? The Compton Police Department.
I was approached by the FBI and ATF about a year afterwards, while I was working with death row records in regards to racketeering within death row records, and also at that time, the mayor of Compton, Omar Bradley. Some other things that occurred within the city. I didn't know that the FBI at that time was following Reggie. The homeboys, and that's how things started out with the FBI.
He really was not that street person. He didn't understand the streets' value.
At 24, Tupac Shakur was a platinum-selling artist, the movie star, and an inmate at the Dannemora jail in upstate New York.
By the time that Tupac Shakur had gone to prison, he had already shot 2 cops in the city of Atlanta. The charges were dropped against him, but he'd still shot cops. So he was no favorite with law enforcement.
That's just plain out period. Don't come to jail. I'm telling you straight up. This ain't the spot. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's like you an animal. And this is not the spot. No man don't want to be here. No man or woman wants to be here.
Pac is now in Dannemora. Everybody is visiting him back and forth.
Before the Rikers, after the Rikers, Dannemora, after Dannemora, I mean, I visited him. I took a trip. One day I was like, I gotta go to New York and see Pac.
And I think also that Tupac got it in his mind that he needed someone to protect him. Now, that again isn't true, that he needed someone to protect him, because Watani had a group of people, had always put a group of people around him to look out for him. The reason things happened to Tupac is Tupac would step outside of that group. If people put a group of people around you to look out for you, you need to stay inside that group. You don't need to step out and create new alliances with people that you don't know.
I got a phone call that Death Row had went to visit Tupac, and that I think he's siding with Suge.
The whole kind of Death Row thing is Tupac wanted to go to Death Row. What he told me face to face, as close as we were sitting, is I want to go to Death Row because I want to record with Dre and Snoop. He said to me, you can make the phone call or I'll have someone make the phone call. And I think Watani and I were both there at Dannemora talking to him at the time and told him, you don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that. You're #1 on the charts. Your record's outselling anybody at this particular time. All Death Row is Interscope. You don't need to go to Death Row.
Pac worked 24/7.
Because I knew he was going to end it. This was just a means. He had to get out of jail. And he wanted his mom to have a house. And he would do those 3 albums. And after those 3 albums were done, the house is paid for. What is he going to do? Because he had other ambitions.
At the time, Suge wasn't letting anyone work with Dre or Snoop unless they were part of Death Row.
In those months, in those last 9 months of his life, he had the kind of desperation that I talked about earlier. The only thing that mattered was to make a difference.
Thug life is like the 12th grade. Some people graduate from high school and don't seek to do anything else.
His lifestyle on video and on tape and even on song looked like a party. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a gangster party. It wasn't a party at all.
You have to remember, Tupac was out on bail. And the reason that he was rushing to get as many songs done as he could was because he wasn't sure that bail wouldn't be revoked at some point and that he may actually go back to prison.
He was not a gangster. Not one day in his life, not even the day in the MGM when he stomped whoever the hell that was on the floor.
I was in a limo, me and Tupac, Outlaw Immortals. We were driving around in Harlem, and the radio came on with Snoop Dogg saying that he had no beef with New York, which sent Pac into a rage.
And at that time, the artist at the height of that whole forefront was Snoop. How the fuck did that feel?
Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe.
23-year-old Calvin Brodus, a.k.a. Snoop Doggy Dogg, the man who made gangster rap mainstream, stands accused of murder.
Los Angeles police announced that 21-year-old Calvin Brodus, better known as rap star Snoop Doggy Dogg, had turned himself into police on Friday along with 2 other young black men, all accompanied by an attorney, in connection with the murder on August 25th of a man named Philip Waldemariam and what police believe was a gang-related shooting.
We, the jury in above entitled action, find the defendant, Calvin Brodus, not guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
Only if David Kennedy just would have had love for me on that level and just did it for me, just not for the paper, but just doing it for the love, because I know that's how he is about me. He's not concerned with the money issue, and you know what I'm saying, and I knew that when he did his closing argument.
You know, we beat a murder trial for him, but then he was on probation. Then he got caught with 2 ounces of marijuana. Then he got caught with guns. And each time it's nothing. They're not going to violate him. Because for the street guys know what I'm talking about. There's no puzzle. I mean, if you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never going to come to prison, that's because he's an informant. He's a rat, a snitch.
You know, it was Suge and his guys and Tupac and myself. And it was Snoop Dogg and Dre and the Dog Pound. That's how it was on the personal side.
But, you know, that was Pac, man. You cross him, there's no gray area. It's black and white. You cross him, you do something, you screw up, you are out.
Now, since he's not around, everybody claims that they was great friends. Everybody do a show. Some artists knew him, but like Pac and Snoop at the end hated each other. And you could tell that by the simple fact that when Snoop did Dogfather, Pac was not on not one song. And Pac didn't like Dre. That would change the Death Row camp because of the jealousy of Tupac. Because Tupac is all of a sudden now, he's this major star, he getting all the light, he getting all the attention.
I didn't feel nothing from nobody at first. I mean, especially Snoop and Pac came up together. You know, Thug Life and Dog Pound, we like came up together. You know, Thug Life, murder was the case, and I Get Around was the same time we would see each other and travel. Yeah, you know what I mean? Keep it moving. That might have changed over time because that group of people hadn't been around Pac like we had. So they didn't know how Pac is as a celebrity, as a star. To actually deal with him requires more attention, more time, because he's Pac.
And here's the irony. Tupac left to go to Death Row Records because he wanted to record with Snoop and with Dre. But when he got there, by the time he was done, he didn't like either of them.
Tupac looked at me and said, "Man, is that how my shit gonna sound?" And I'm like, "Nah, man." Because he's ready to kick a hole in the wall. Told the guy, "Nah, man, they kicked us out of Can-Am, 6 o'clock this morning. This is the best that Kevin Lewis could do for us." He picks up the phone. He calls the office. He says Snoop was corny, take all day doing one song. He says, "I'm paying Nate Dogg child support, Rage. Y'all kick my engineers out the studio so that Rage can continue working on a record that she's been working on for 2 years. That's pretty fucked up. I am paying for this. Why are you guys kicking them out the studio when my record is the #1 record on Billboard?" Stuff like that, you know what I'm saying?
So, you know, to me, you know, it was childish on their part, but they can never feel the shoes that Pac felt. I walk into the light of evil.
But in the city of New York on September 4th of 1996, there was a big problem, and that had to do with a radio interview that Snoop Dogg did.
Because she asked me on the air, "How do you feel about Puffy and Biggie?" And I said what I felt. They're my homeboys, I love them.
Pac, of course, had big beef with New York.
Pac had a beef with New York because he got attacked in 1994, and there was a shot fired, and unfortunately it was self-inflicted.
Snoop was basically saying, "Hey, I don't have a beef with him." That set Tupac off, and we immediately spun the limo around, and we went back to the hotel to confront Snoop. We couldn't find him, but we found Mr. Knight, and that's who Tupac confronted about what was going on the radio while we were in New York. I think Mr. Knight had me stay for the safety of Tupac, because I think Mr. Knight, with me not being there, he would have put his hands on him. He was that upset. And Pac's words were, I'm gonna cut out Machiavelli, and when I cut out Machiavelli, I'm the hell up out of here. You got your money, I don't want nothing else to do with Death Row, I'm out.
And after the major fallout between Suge and Tupac, suddenly Snoop walks back to the hotel.
When I got back to the hotel, it was a whole nother atmosphere, like
perpetuating it so it could be drama, which I still love MTV, but when it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war?
So when we got on the plane to go back to LA the next day, Suge didn't let none of my security ride with me. I had to ride on the plane with him, his homies, and Pac. And it was the most uncomfortable ride I ever had in my life. In fact, put the blanket on my head, knife in my hand, fork in my hand, and just sleep the rest of the ride.
because I feel like they finna try to do something to me. So I walk down the steps. We meet right here. I'm like, cuz, you going to Vegas?
Why was somebody that wasn't going to Vegas anyway asking Tupac, are you going to Vegas?
He do me like this. Went his way and he went my way.
Apparently the Long Beach Crips had put out a DVD with a bunch of diss songs and some music videos that dissed the Death Row organization and dissed Suge Knight.
DVD was all about killing Death Row people. You feel me? Now the DVD was predominantly Long Beach people in it. You feel me? I'm from Long Beach. My whole time that I was on Death Row, I lived right here in Long Beach.
You always saw Pac and Suge hanging together. You always saw these niggas everywhere together. They was like big brother, little brother and shit. And the thing is, that relationship was dangerous for the powers that be.
I remember that. Not the West Coast. I got backlash from Suge Knight, Tupac, and Death Row. And then was our last days hanging out before he got killed. So we ended on a kind of foul note.
The tension between Death Row Records and the Long Beach Crips and the Snoop Dogg Dogg Pound camps was palpable, to the point where Snoop Dogg went to the point of making an entire music video that showed total disrespect for Suge Knight.
The bully got checked, you know what I'm saying? You know how when you in school and you got a bully, and he's scaring everybody and everybody going the other way. Scared putting their lunch money up, hiding their gold chains. Well, this day at school, the bully got checked. He had to put his gold chain in and try to light a cigar. You know, but the media didn't want to bring it off like that because they were scared that Suge was going to do something to him for telling the truth.
Shit go haywire.
Were you in Vegas?
No, we heard about it because they was trying to get us to go to Vegas. And we was like, Dog Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because we know everybody.
And now we have opportunity. The people that need to be in Las Vegas are in Las Vegas, and the people who don't want to be seen in Las Vegas have cleared out.
Cause I am the LBC. I'm the king of Long Beach, nigga. I made it fashionable for niggas to bang the dub. I made it universal, motherfucker. I'm the nigga that took the set around the whole globe. Yeah, that's me.
Tupac hated people, and we were supposed to hate people because Tupac hated them.
In most law enforcement investigations, you find that the first suspects that are looked at are generally wives, girlfriends, significant others, people that would normally have a natural relationship, and you'd actually try to figure out if they were the most logical suspect. And in this case, it doesn't seem to happen, yet you're looking at she had plenty of motive.
She was managing Snoop in the very beginning, but Snoop wasn't happy with that.
Nightlife Management, which Sharita Knight owned, which was Suge Knight's wife. By Suge owning Death Row Records, it would be a conflict of interest of him managing his artists too. So he had that in his wife's name, and not only did she manage every artist that was on Death Row, she also managed Caution. She managed us.
I think that he gave her the nightlife entertainment to give her some experience, get her experience, because she was young.
Anything goes down with Suge, you know who's going to run this company? Reggie. Nope, wrong. That's pressure Reggie can't handle. Let me tell you, if something goes wrong with Suge, who's going to run the company? Common sense, right? Sharita is on the thing. Sharita's on the paper. Yeah, Reggie would carry most of the burden. Man, they're tighter than you think. They're tighter than you think.
Even though she was young, you know, she had a baby, and so that kind of gave her the edge over a few people. I knew what he did when we were outside Death Row Records, but as soon as Sharita found out about it, something that had happened, he sent you home. You were done. He didn't play that one. It was like, I guess it was like, okay, either me or them, and I'm not giving up the child check.
She had a cheating husband. She had financial ties to him. She could definitely gain from him being dead. So in all of those circumstances, there might be good motive.
I mean, murder is pretty simple. The first person you go after is the spouse or the person closest to the victim.
It just changed his ego, his temper. The women started flocking the money, and that was basically the demise of our marriage. Suge got out of control.
She went with the flow. It didn't bother her. A lot of times she got herself into situations too.
Actually, by the time she said that, she was suing Snoop and trying to get money because she said her husband was going to kill him at any moment. She wanted to get her money while Snoop was still alive.
But more than just Suge, we wondered if maybe Tupac was a threat to Sharitha.
When Tupac came in the picture of Death Row, it all just crumbled.
It would have been easy for her to take over, but I don't think that she had the experience that was necessary to keep a multi-million-dollar record company running like that.
You couldn't reach Sharitha except through intermediaries who were lawyers, but I had documents, and she knew I had those. I basically knew about her relationship with Kevin Gaines, so it was how far in Kevin Gaines was. Was he just involved with you, or was he really was he working for Suge too? And she basically claimed that he did work for Death Row Records, but it was at her behest and through her, and that the only time he was ever around Suge was the time she thought Suge was going to kill him.
He worked briefly for Suge Knight, just as approximately 100 other officers. Officers were paid $75 an hour to work for Suge Knight. I was asked to work for Suge Knight, which I declined. But a lot of officers did, and they weren't all black officers, and they weren't all from LAPD.
They took a drive, and Gaines and she both got scared.
But according to the stories that roamed the halls of Death Row Records, Kevin Gaines was taken out to the middle of the desert as a warning. He was stripped naked and left to walk back to the city.
Because Suge was being very menacing, and she basically backed him off by saying, this man's a police officer, he's got a gun, you wouldn't dare kill a police officer.
According to FBI documents, Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas from 2 days prior to the shooting of Shakur until 2 days after the death of Shakur. So we know that Kevin Gaines was already Snoop Dogg's bodyguard and apparently his muscle, and that Kevin Gaines had a relationship with Sharitha Knight. So what exactly was Kevin Gaines doing out on that special assignment in Las Vegas? We came across a letter that was we call it the confession letter, that was given to us by Chris Blatchford at Fox News. And this letter was given to him in 1998. By a gentleman who is now in prison. But at the time, he was a confidential informant for Fox News for Chris Blatchford, and it was reliable. It helped him, actually tipped him off to a couple of really big burglaries that had happened. CHP's offices got burglarized, and he helped Fox catch the people that did it. And this letter was alleged to have been written by Danny and Malcolm Patton. And the Patton brothers were Pyru.
Yes.
And
it's a gang in Los Angeles.
Yes, it was a gang in Los Angeles. I should say that. That the Blood Gang. And that they had mapped out this entire, not only confession that they were involved with the shootings, but why the shootings happened, what was all involved with it to begin with. And in that letter, not only were the Pattons the ones who were alleged to have written the letter, but they named a rapper by the name of Little Half Dead. You have to be pretty hardcore, know the Dog Pound, to know who the players are, to know who he is. So his name came up, but it was immediately kind of the scoff because nobody ever heard this before. You don't need to look any further than the album cover that Little Half Dead did. In this album cover, he features a picture of a dead Tupac Shakur slumped over a console at Can-Am Studios, along with a picture of what arguably looks like Yafu Fula, the second victim right after the shooting, as a victim as well, being shot in the head. Little Half Dead himself is dressed up as no one other than the Terminator.
Dog Pound, we was really on our fuck Death Row shit, really. You know what I'm saying? We was already saying fuck Death Row.
And the story goes that they owed Freeway Rick Ross some money. At that time, Fox News was paying a lot of money, and if they thought you could break a story that would get the kind of OJ ratings that you solved Tupac and Biggie, that kind of ratings back in 97, 98, well, maybe it was worth giving this to. We've also heard that it was an insurance policy because people were dropping like flies during those days. Sometimes you can give the press a letter and you say, if anything happens to me, you're free to put this out. There are several different points that the letter brings out, and we narrowed it down to 4 basic benchmarks that we could look at to see if there was any legitimacy. The first one was demo stealing. The letter mentions the fact that there was a problem with demo stealing. At the time, there was a problem with demo stealing. There were a lot of people ripping off albums.
Yeah, I saw that all the time in the studio. I still see it to this day. When people would come to Death Row to play their tracks for us, if it was a good track after they left, we might just make something that sounded like what we just heard. Now there's a song by Tupac called Toss It Up, which is really started out from No Diggity. One day, all of a sudden, Death Row Security comes through the door and they've got the master tape of No Diggity. As it got handed down the line to different producers, more and more stuff got erased of No Diggity, and then it's just kind of hard to hear that that's in there.
The second thing that we looked at in the letter was actually the reference to the fact that there was an altercation between Little Half Dead and Tupac's soldiers.
I think Pac was a great man, but his governor was broke. You know, in the car, when you got your governor where you could only go a certain, Pac had to go all the way, every time, all out or nothing.
It got to the point where I had a bail bondsman on speed dial, and he knew me, and he knew our money was good. So anytime Tupac or any of the guys got in trouble, and usually it was Tupac, and then Man would have to get bailed out also, that I'd call and get them bailed out right away.
This is back in the days where we were using DATs, and I queued up the DAT to the wrong spot, and Pac, he just blasted me in front of the whole crowd. I'm sorry, y'all. That's my stupid brother. That's my stupid brother on the mix. You know, I'm like,
whoa, they better come now. Check this out. They fired me, but did it in a roundabout punk snitch way. So I caught them on the streets and beat they behinds. You know what I'm saying? Okay, like, I was a nigga to the knees, brother. And it ain't over. I still got more than
and I'm going like this is a movie. My fist is coming back like this. I got him by the neck, and I'm getting ready to punch him, and just like a movie, I get snatched off him. And then it's the bum rush, and everybody just start rat packing me. There's like raging bull, blood spurting everywhere, and I just felt my body just contort. I'd never been, rat packed before. I was just shocked I didn't feel anything.
The third thing that the confession letter brings up is actually the fact that there was a bounty placed out on Tupac and Suge Knight. That's not news. There were bounties that were put out allegedly on Death Row Chains. Right. There was allegedly bounties put out on that. Crooked Eye talks about the fact that there was actually a bounty that was put out. If you were a Death Row artist, you were marked for death.
Okay.
The fourth thing that we looked at, and this was the real jaw-dropper, and that was that they mentioned Reggie Wright Jr. and his involvement in the fact that he was going to provide information as to where they were going to be and to provide barricades so that there was actually no way out.
Tupac thought he was going to a place where he could have protection, but both Tupac and Suge were in over their heads, and they were both targeted for execution that night.
Why don't you have people mad at you on one set that's the holding your freedom in your hand?
Yeah, we love it.
By this time, we know that Death Row Records and Ruthless Records had been funded with drug money, and that Death Row Records was the subject of a money laundering investigation. The operation at Death Row Records was the kind of organization that you'd want to keep things kind of quiet. Suge Knight started showing up on talk shows, he started showing up on magazine covers, and he started bringing a lot of attention to people who just did not want that kind of attention.
In 1996, Death Row Records is worth $500 million. There are a lot of people that are really upset with Suge Knight at the time. So if you're Reggie Wright Jr., it only makes sense that if something is worth $500 million and you're tired of being harassed by the guy who runs it, why not just kill him and take it from him? Guns, drugs, jealousy, money. This is a really bad formula here.
And keep Daz back. Keep Daz back. I'm like, fuck that shit. I could have jumped out on his ass in Vegas, but it was killing me. But Snoop was like, hold on. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up.
On September the 7th, Reggie Wright asked me to ride with him to the meeting that we were having. It was about 12 noon, and we were going to George Calisa's office in Las Vegas. When we arrived there, there was 23 other security personnel for Right Way Security at this meeting, along with the attorney and Reggie Wright.
Which is another thing that's unusual.
And one of the main issues and the main points were we were not to carry our weapons. So that right away brought up the issue of why not.
I've been to Club 662 on many of occasions, and never have they told me to leave my weapons.
So myself, Michael Moore, and Al Gittins was excluded from that because we were going to be the main security at the Club 662 that evening.
Why would I leave my weapons in a vehicle or in the hotel room, and I'm personally guarding Pac in one of the most hottest places to be?
We were told to leave our weapons originally into our hotel room. Okay, then we said, well, why would we leave them in a hotel room?
There was going to be a lot of commotion, there was going to be a lot of people, and what that's going to make it is a bodyguarding incident.
So at this point in time, all of the weapons were going to be at Club 662 left in our vehicles. Therefore, if there was going to be a problem, we would be able to retrieve our weapons from our vehicles.
I got into a little argument with Reggie Wright at lunch over it. He said, Mike, I'm putting Frank back on him, and I'm taking you back off. And I said, Reggie, that part doesn't make sense. Why not leave me and Frank on Tupac?
I was Los Angeles County jail booking in a burglary suspect. I went to work that day.
At 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Las Vegas, at the Luxor, security was all brought together by Reggie Wright on the day that Pac was shot, and we were told not to carry weapons because we were all armed.
We were told specifically, do not carry your weapon.
And did you find that kind of strange? Everybody got to go to fight at the casino, and everybody thought it was strange. That why were guys told not to carry weapons? Even the cops that were there told not to carry weapons. Everybody was told not to carry weapons.
That's what we were told. Now, I, at the meeting, was asked one of the few questions. Why would you tell us not to carry our weapons?
This is their #1 artist. I mean, he's as high profile as they get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're paying for all the security.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got all these guys at the club.
Right.
Something's wrong. The pieces of this whole situation, it just doesn't fit.
I think the reason they removed me from Tupac is because I was one of the few people that wouldn't buy into not carrying your weapon. And during no part of that day did I take my weapon off. And Mr. Wright knew that. So they removed me off Tupac so there wouldn't be a weapon there.
I rode with Reggie, and as we were driving, going over to the meeting, he began to tell me about how he was upset at Kevin Hackey because Kevin Hackey didn't come out to Las Vegas, and that Kevin Hackey had my Nextel two-way cell phone radio that should have been given to me when I arrived in Vegas.
Normally, Frank and I would both have radios, and Frank could just say, hey, Mike, we're over here. There was no radio again. That day, Frank doesn't have a radio, I don't have a radio, which I normally have, and we have confusion. So for most of the day, all this went on, and Tupac did not have a clue that's what we were doing.
Death Row was worth $500 million at that time, and Tupac Shakur most of that revenue. If your go-to excuse as the director of security for Death Row Records is that you can't afford an extra radio and that's why you don't have enough radios to go around, you should be ashamed of yourself.
When Reggie did that and I questioned it, Reggie did something that he's never done. He's never stayed at 662. That day, he stayed at the club. Then why would he need me there? And why would I be taken off of Tupac?
I didn't just meet Suge when I started working at Death Row. I used to work at Solar Records. He was running around gophering and going buying lunch and picking lunch up and all of that stuff. But they groomed him into Suge Knight. The ladies would see from Suge is this nice side. And the nice side is making sure you didn't want for nothing.
You know, Suge, for a while, would send her roses all the time. Too many. Every time when she was here, you opened the door and there were some more flowers, you know, for every occasion and sometimes every week. Initially, he would send her flowers. And when we were still in California, they initially kept the bills paid. See, we thought that was Pac's house. We did not know that was Death Row's house. That was not his house. It was not in his name. From the moment we got there, we thought that was Pac's house he was buying.
So he bought everybody a car for Christmas. But the catch on that, on the control side, on the flip side, he never put the car in your name. So if he got mad at you, he took your car back.
He died in September, October. We had a state storage company come and take all of the stuff out of that house.
He has a side of him that is the sweetest pie, and then he has a side of him that he literally turns into the devil. Because he's so nice with it, he catches you off guard when he does something.
Suge had them to pack everything in Wilshire House and send it down here. She didn't even know it was coming. It looked and it was there. She didn't want it particularly, but, you know, she took it because it was here because she said it wasn't his.
We were getting very close to wrapping on Gridlock. We probably had maybe a week or two left on it. And myself and Kevin Hackey, we were both on duty that day on the set. And it was in the evening time because it was already night. And I got this phone call from Yasmin Fula. And she said, "Hey, Frank, I'm coming down to Gridlock. Don't you and Kevin leave because I need to talk to the two of you." So, you know, probably 30 minutes later, she shows up. And she goes, "Hey," she goes, "there's some things going on over at the Death Row office. Pac has called an audit on the Death Row office." You have to keep in mind, it was a conflict of interest for Tupac to have the same attorney that Death Row had, being David Kenner. You know, I mean, that speaks for itself right there. He wasn't feeling comfortable with what he was receiving, I guess, as far as his royalties or whatever.
So that's the completion of that obligation as I know it. And I tell you, he had movie scripts and he was truly interested in that. People were talking to him about it.
Yeah, he's done. He was done. He was done. He was done. There were meetings with attorneys, Yaz and I. Yeah, he was done. He was done. He had fulfilled his obligation with Death Row and no intentions of renewing any sort of paper agreement.
If David Kenner or Suge Knight or anyone like that was upset with Tupac, what would they would have done? Institutionalized Tupac. Had his appeal bond revoked for some reason. They would have no reason to kill him or anything like that. They would just have him go back to jail and humble him again.
According to Reggie Wright, if Tupac got out of line, we'll just throw him back in jail and humiliate him, humble him a little. Isn't that what they did to Kevin Gaines? Isn't that what they did to Snoop Dogg?
And Sullivan is down on his stomach. And that's it. It's over in the first round.
Tyson was Pac's homeboy, and to see Tyson in the ring doing his thing, whooping up on Bruce Seldon. Pac was excited, he was jumping up and he was, saying what he was saying, everybody, getting excited about a fight. And that continued from the seats into the back of the area where the boxers come back in at. after the fight is over. And he, got back there and he's just going off, man, 50 blows, 50, man, he knocked him out, 50 blows, blah, blah, blah. That was it. That was it. That was the excitement of that fight. That was Pac's excitement behind it. Mike Tyson never came in the back, so we never met up with Mike. We ended up leaving. As we left out of the fight arena area, as we got out into the casino area again, the rest of our entourage was out there waiting on us. As we walked up to greet them, which would have been, all of Death Row entourage, along with Tupac's entourage, one of Suge's guys, his name is Trevon, came over and whispered in Tupac's right ear, because I was standing on Tupac's left. Tupac took off and ran.
His governor was broke.
I took off behind him.
Your kid was about to get overturned.
And the rest of the entourage is behind me.
Not want to go back to prison.
I'd never been Rat Pack before.
Tupac comes to, at this time I didn't know who it was, now being Orlando Anderson, standing by this planter, just like waiting.
Why don't you just have people mad at you on that? That's the holding your freedom in your hand.
It was a setup.
Tupac had a 4-year jail the other day. Holding your freedom. Holding your freedom. Holding your freedom.
Pac just ran up on him and then Orlando Anderson swung back. At this time, Pac's medallion broke. When he reached down and grabbed the medallion, I grabbed him and got him out of the fight. By the time the entourage who was behind me had gotten there, the footage that is from the MGM everyone sees, Orlando Anderson's on the ground and everybody's kicking at him, beating him down or whatever. Because I knew the way through the MGM, because I was in the MGM walking around earlier looking for everyone, I knew how to walk us out of the MGM to the entrance. And I walked us out of the entrance. As the tape shows, I'm in front, Pac and Suge, and everybody is following me now.
After the beating, there seems to be a divergence of stories. On one hand, some people say that Orlando Anderson left the MGM to go on and do other things. But witness Corey Edwards actually said that Orlando Anderson stayed at the bar. Corey Edwards was there with friends, as was Orlando Anderson. And if Orlando Anderson was in fact at that bar, according to Corey Edwards, you don't think the Las Vegas Police Department would have checked the closed-circuit cameras at the MGM to find out whether that was true? Well, Russell Poole said they did, and Russell Poole said that that was true.
After the fight that occurred at the MGM, when we got to the Lexor, the crowd was all outside, all of the groupies and everything. As I walked to the car with them, the first thought in my mind was, my weapon is in my car. My car is on the other side of the Lexor Hotel. I wasn't going to tell Tupac and tell Suge, wait 1 minute, I have to run over to my car and get my gun. Well, how come you don't have your gun on you? Well, Reggie told us not to.
You took a fall because you didn't have your gun. You should have your gun. Well, you know what, man? See, now we got conflicting stories, man, because we were told you not. He didn't tell you when I told y'all, listen in the car, you carry your gun with you. Exactly. There you go. You said leave them in the car.
And it ponders through me all the time. What if I could have done something? Then I would have really been the hero that Suge Knight once thought I was when Snoop's trailer got shot up. I have put myself in this position in my mind many times. To say, what if I would have had my gun?
While I was working at 662, I heard something over the Nextels that we all carried for security. And what I heard was, got him, got him, got him.
Michael talks about hearing something over the radio. Well, he would have heard it over Reggie's radio because he wouldn't have had a radio that night.
Then someone else came on the radio and said, hey, don't say nothing over the radio, which was the Nextels we were using radio to radio. And I just clearly heard somebody say, don't say that over the radio. But the person who said it was not Homeboy Security, nor was it one of our security guards. It was, to me, it would be like a stranger. Someone, and the person that said that was Caucasian. Definitely not African American.
Oh no, even getting that, we were in the cab and we heard, something happened Tupac, something. It was like, over the radio, those rappers, Tupac, something, people have been shot. And I was like, oh no, I'm like, pull over, I'm like calling, Yaz, I'm like, is everything okay? And she called, she says, no, go to the hospital. She told me where the hospital was. We went to the hospital. And I also remember seeing, Suge roll by in the gurney with a little Band-Aid on his head. And I was like, what happened?
They missed. They missed. All of the planning that they'd put into the operation, they shot tons of rounds into that car to the point where everybody thought that they were dead. But at the end of the day, they missed.
After the shooting occurred on September 7th that evening, I don't understand something that occurred. Trayvon, after we were questioned by the homicide detectives, went back over to Club 662. If he cared so much about Pac, why didn't he go to the hospital?
It didn't really seem to register on anybody's radar that it might have been an attempted assassination on Suge Knight.
Suge was at the hospital. Pac was at the hospital. How come everyone that supposedly have loved Pac, other than his family, the Outlaws?
This is about selling a narrative. They tried to sell a narrative to the Las Vegas police and it didn't work. They tried to sell the same narrative through Chuck Phillips at the Los Angeles Times, and that didn't work. They tried to sell the narrative through the Wallace investigation and the Wallace civil suit through Wayman Anderson. And then they tried the last round to sell it through an ex-LAPD cop and a book called Murder Rap.
How come everybody didn't go to the hospital? What happened? I don't understand that.
So now we're in damage control mode. Suge Knight got shot at and he lived. Now what the hell are we going to do? Because you've got somebody asking questions and we don't have an answer.
I had Newsweek and Time. I had all of the majors, magazines and newspapers coming to Club 662.
They got to make up a story. They got to come up with something.
Because after the fight, Tupac was going to entertain.
You have the attempted assassination of the head of arguably the largest record label at that time. Now, if this were David Geffen or any other big record label executive, there'd be cops falling all over themselves to try to investigate this. But it didn't seem to work that way.
So then I went and to see Tupac. They wouldn't let me close to Tupac, but they did let me see in there. So that's when Kenner came to me and said, do you have keys to Death Row, to the offices? He said, well, then you get on the next thing smoking. Here, you need some money? I said, no, I got money. And go back to L.A.
So Suge Knight goes back to Los Angeles and has a meeting at Death Row Records.
Suge called the meeting. All the artists were instructed to come to this meeting, and certain security was invited, and I happened to be one of them. But prior to going into the meeting with Suge and all the artists from Death Row, Reggie met with us out front in his own meeting. But I'm going to add something to that. We were also instructed to lie by Reggie Wright to Suge.
But if I'm Suge Knight and somebody takes a shot at me, regardless of who else is in the car, they're shooting at me. I want to know who shot at me and why.
And the reason we were instructed to lie was because Reggie Wright told us not to carry any weapons.
What do? They lie.
So I have, by me just looking at what Reggie told me, I'm thinking that Mr. Knight was unaware.
More importantly, I want to know how far down this rabbit hole goes.
The meeting was basically about what happened, and the artists were drilling security about what methods we had used and what were some of our tactics.
And we know from looking at the statement that Suge Knight gave to the Las Vegas Police Department that he fully expected that Frank Alexander and every other bodyguard there was to carry their weapons. So whatever the case might have been, Suge Knight didn't get the message.
I looked around and no one said it. No one was speaking up for security.
So I'm Suge Knight and I'm asking myself, who the hell is shooting at me and why? And who's the first person I'm going to ask? My head of security, Reggie Wright Jr.
And it looked like Reggie wasn't going to say that information to them.
The driver appeared to be hit with fragments in the head area.
At this time, the wounds are life-threatening, but serious, not in critical condition at this time. Homicide detectives are very busy right now.
Well, he has numerous injuries. He has multiple gunshot wounds to the chest, and so yes, that's always a possibility that a lung could be hit, a lung could collapse, or there could be other internal injuries that might need additional attention in the OR.
Kevin Hackey shows up in Las Vegas, and he's got a lot of questions as to what's happening.
I was in the hospital. His eyes, you could tell he was sedated. So, I mean, obviously his pupils were open, but there was no movement there. I actually started crying. I mean, I always call him, I like the kid.
But Kevin Hackey gets into a scrape with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police when he reveals to them that he may be involved with a federal law enforcement agency.
I did work undercover for the FBI and ATF during my tenure with Death Row Records and Right Way Protective Services.
There was a report that was written by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department about the altercation with Kevin Hackey. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department wasn't concerned about anybody's safety, but they were more concerned about the public relations of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and strangely, the public relations of the Compton Police Department. Now, since Compton wasn't going to be involved in the case for several days later, why would the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department be so concerned about the public relations of the Compton Police Department if they weren't there yet?
A CEO of a company or the wife of somebody being murdered is one kind of investigation, but now you're talking about something where there was all kinds of alleged baggage involved.
This is where you begin to see Compton Police Department inject themselves into the middle of the Las Vegas investigation under the false pretense that it's a gang activity.
And again, that first night, I don't think he was totally forthcoming on everything he knew.
So they approached Frank Alexander to basically lie to the Vegas Police Department and tell them that a chain was actually snatched the day of the shooting, September 6th, earlier that morning. And that was the story that was concocted then. It happened that day. Nothing about the Lakewood Mall and nothing about anything happening months earlier. It was all happening that day. And that's what they told Frank Alexander to tell the cops, and that's what Frank Alexander told the cops.
Every time I think it's over, they drag me right back in again.
And later on, when Frank Alexander is asked to repeat that story again, he refuses.
We were supposed to went down to Vegas, me, you, and Malcolm, because Malcolm can ID the person. We were supposed to send you and him down to ID, to see if you look at the pictures, because they had a suspect, and that's when they had Orlando as a suspect, and then they were going to just have y'all look at the pictures before then, just to see if maybe that, made your memory get better or whatever. So you can describe somebody, but once you see a picture, oh yeah, that's him. And so that's what they were going to have you to do. And that's what they were told them, that we got two witnesses that's, maybe can help you out and put some things in the light. And plus the statement that you gave about the chain and all of that, with the additional information.
And when he refuses, the story begins to evolve a little bit. It doesn't become that the chain was snatched that day. It becomes that the chain was snatched several months earlier.
His head of security is a ex-Compton police officer. It's suspected that you have Compton gang members who came up there to do a shooting, gangland-style shooting, and yet and still, who's heading up the investigation? You have a lieutenant from Compton Police. This whole thing, it smells from high hell.
Hundreds of hours of investigation was spent on the narrative that said that this guy murdered this other person. That narrative came from the powers to be.
There's a Compton police officer by the name of Tim Brennan who is a protege of Reggie Wright Sr. Well, Tim Brennan is the first one that comes up in this investigation with the entire concept that a gang was involved and that Orlando Anderson was actually the shooter. Tim Brennan and Bobby Ladd run around talking about what great guys Reggie Wright Sr. and Horry Taylor were. And of course, this is the same Reggie Wright Sr. that the Compton Police Department says is in charge of both the gangs and the drugs, and drugs are disappearing from the evidence locker. And the same Horry Taylor, that's the one that has 2 keys of cocaine fall out of his locker when they investigate him after being suspended.
So obviously from a law enforcement agency looking into this, all of a sudden there's war in Compton. Basic calls are made, so quote unquote, alleged Crip members, whatever, were killed left and right. But from Las Vegas standpoint, I mean, the whole thing smells.
Tim Brennan lays the entire Orlando Anderson theory smack down in the middle of the investigation and uses a couple of confidential informants, and we have no idea of their reliability.
Oh, yeah. People, embellish in search warrants to get it, so they can get it. It's not, in my experience, it wasn't something that was widely done, but there were times that you'd hear about it was done.
But seriously, what are they going to do? They're going to try to blame somebody else. And who are they going to blame in a hurry? They're going to blame somebody that they can't point the finger on, somebody that can't be named individually. They're going to name some entity. They're going to name some group, some people, some gang. But at the end of the day, they're going to lie.
And they had to get a search warrant, and they couldn't come up with, the probable cause for it, so sometimes it was embellished or, made up.
That's what Tim Brennan told me personally. He said whenever they're ready, tell them that when they're ready to know who did it, who was in the car, and all that stuff, tell them we have the evidence, we know who did it, we know exactly who was in that car that night. And he's basically saying, and I don't want to start dissension between two different departments, but he said
it's funny because everything we had came from Tim Brennan.
You can't always take what they say 100% true, because you always have to look at a motive for somebody of why are they saying why are they telling me what they tell me? Do they have a motive?
You have to understand the absurdity of this. The entire narrative being manufactured is for a reason. You have to solicit a response from the judge. You have to get the judge to believe the story.
Is there some reason why they're doing this? Because, it may be something other than the truth.
If they had told the judge, hey, there's just some random arm that came out of a car, we really don't know who it is, and we really don't know who was responsible for it, and it may or may not have been related to a chain snatch earlier that day or 2 months earlier, and we're really not sure of that, there's not a very good likelihood that that judge is going to sign that search warrant.
They don't like him, or they don't like the individual, or they got something against the individual, or somebody told them, I need you to pin this guy.
And no witness to the Tupac Shakur fight at the MGM said anything about Tupac saying anything, especially the line, "Are you from the South?"
Cops do it all the time.
That was intentionally added to the search warrant to give it a flavor of contradiction and to identify the South with the Southside Crips. And this was to make it appear gang motivated.
When a judge signs a search warrant, that judge is absolutely relying upon the representations made in the affidavit, and the affidavit has to be under oath.
It's important to understand that this kind of a false narrative emphasizes the fact that there was a fight, and it made it Tupac versus the Southside Crips. So it set up the big fight.
The judge is relying upon the veracity and truthfulness of that police officer.
The statements made by Tim Brennan were not simply academic. They were actually made for an intended purpose and for a reason that judge would have to buy later.
And there are times, and I was a judge myself, where you get the call at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning from the drug enforcement officers that they want to come to your house and they have you sign a search warrant.
It's like when we served the search warrant on my undercover operation, the affidavit was this thick.
The affidavit says that somebody got out of the car and started talking shit. Well, that didn't happen. No witness ever said that happened. And if you really go back to think about the amount of work that would have involved, it asks a whole lot more questions.
And you got to make darn sure as a judge that you're attentive, you're attuned to what they're doing, and you have some clarity.
Well, if all your facts are based upon the opinion or assumptions of other individuals and you have no confirmation of that by other witnesses, then you're going to go back and you're going to put your affidavit together and you say, I am swearing to these truths that were given to me. And these truths may not be truths. They're only opinions and assumptions.
For example, if someone got out of the passenger side of a stopped car and walked all the way around the front of that car or around the back of that car, talking shit and holding a gun, that the bodyguards would have reacted to that. But it didn't happen.
So the detective that is getting the information must be able to confirm or to have other evidentiary value to verify them as truths.
In my era, If I was caught lying, it would have been the end of my career. I would have been fired. They wouldn't have whitewashed. They would have fired me.
Each one of the statements made in Tim Brennan's affidavit that were incorrect were not made accidentally. They were made intentionally. And the reason that they were made intentionally was to alter the meaning of the search warrant. They altered the statement. It wasn't, "Are you from the South?" Tupac said nothing like that. But if you alter it and you say, "Are you from the South?" that's not just a simple mistake. That makes it personal, it makes it argumentative, and it makes it actionable.
They can't use you anymore because you've already lied on the record, and therefore you have no credibility anymore, so therefore they can't use you.
And it got to the point where Compton had to do something.
It began before dawn. The crime sweep involved 300 officers, 10 agencies, including the FBI, at more than 37 locations in the Compton, Linwood, and Long Beach areas.
Based on the affidavit and the search warrant of Tim Brennan, they go ahead and they do this big gang sweep.
Of course, during the affidavit, I chased him into a house and we recovered some guns out of that house.
Looking all over Compton for Orlando Anderson. But who finds him? Tim Brennan. So they haul Orlando Anderson in. Vegas police ask him a bunch of questions. And what do the Vegas police do? They walk away.
I just don't see the interest.
And Tim Brennan and the Compton PD can't figure out what the heck's going on. We're giving it to you on a silver platter, and you're just not buying.
I've heard Manning before say that, well, we treat it like every other case, and he doesn't get any special treatment because he is a celebrity, but, you know, I don't know if I buy all that.
There was an arrest made for the murder of Tupac Shakur. It was done by Tim Brennan to Orlando Anderson.
You know, I know the people they need to talk to solve it.
So suddenly the rhetoric starts. Now Las Vegas is incompetent, Brent Becker's incompetent, Kevin Manning's incompetent, everybody's incompetent.
The bullshit that everybody said that we didn't do anything, that's so out in left field, they're ridiculous.
You know, and that's that. I had some problems between Las Vegas and me because they don't, you know, like what I've said. Right. But, you know, I speak the truth.
In the Tim Brennan search warrant, there's mention of several gang members involved, and one of those gang members involved is a gang member by the name of Danny Patton, who also goes by the nickname of White Boy. During the service and the execution of this search warrant, many houses and residences that were involved with these gang members were searched, with the notable exception of one, and that was Danny Patton, aka White Boy. It reminds me of the old statement, don't ask a question you don't already know the answer to.
There are a lot of things that no one else knows about.
The Vegas Police Department knew exactly what was going on. It stunk to high heaven and they didn't want any part of it. On the way out, Orlando Anderson says to Brent Becker, "Are you going to arrest me?" Brent Becker says, "Arrest you for what?"
Do I think we know who did it? Yeah.
And the further and harder that Compton pushed the matter, the further the Vegas police backed away and the further that they didn't want anything to do with it.
Right off the bat, we're wanting to talk to the guy that's in the car with Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight. And we're working right away with that. And in fact, the night of the shooting, we tried to talk to him, but were refused access to him by members of death row, attorneys. And in fact, it took 3 days to get to talk to Suge Knight.
And here's where David Kenner comes into play. David Kenner was a former prosecutor that suddenly, for whatever reason, decided he wanted to start defending criminals, and he became a defense attorney. He was a very good defense attorney.
And we kept getting the runaround, yeah, we'll get you in touch with him. Yes, we'll do this. Yes, we'll do that.
Who was giving you the runaround?
David Kenner's office.
It was actually an umbrella that covered a lot of the legal shenanigans that were going on at Death Row Records.
But understand that any shit can change tomorrow.
Compton PD had one more shot at trying to ruin Suge Knight, and that happened in the courtroom.
They was able to pull they scheme and their ideas off by me being in prison.
He had so many people shook on these streets that, yo, motherfuckers can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they could fully breathe a sigh of relief.
Because there's two things that I always say, being from the ghetto, either they're gonna take the money from you, which you be OJ. If they can't take the money from you, they take you for the money.
It's y'all motherfuckers that's scared of him.
The only way they take you from the money is Like you die, death, or in prison.
Yo, motherfuckers can't wait till he's just gone for good, so they can fully breathe a sigh of relief. I mean, I feel like they're not gonna rest until Suge Knight is dead or in jail.
Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight were kicking Orlando.
I seen him standing right there helping. He was about the only one.
He made the comment that Tupac and Knight beat him up pretty good.
And with that, Suge Knight is sentenced to 9 years in prison. So if the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department weren't interested in Orlando Anderson as a suspect, who were they interested in? I think the answer to that question comes in the form of logs and notes that were made by a police officer on the Los Angeles Police Department involving certain incidents that happened at Death Row's Can-Am Studios. That officer's name was Knox.
You're right that Knox is probably the most underrepresented character in this story because he was the very first guy to get on the fact that there were all these cops working for Death Row Records. I can remember when talking to Sergio Robledo when they were trying to get, subpoena Knox to, and he said, he's disappeared. I mean, the cops have given him a leave of absence. He's left the country. We've staked out his house. He's never home. He hasn't been home in we don't know how long. I mean, we cannot get him the guy we most want, and we cannot locate him. He sort of stumbled into it. He was the senior lead officer, which is, it's an elite position, and there's just one at every LAPD station. He was responding to citizen complaints about activity at Death Row's studios. People were upset that these gangbangers were parking in their driveways, and if they questioned them, then they were being threatened with guns and that kind of thing. So he decided he should visit the studio, and the first day he arrives, he's back and forth with this guy who turns out to be Ramsey Lewis's son and turns into one of the the best informants about what was going on at Death Row Records.
What Kendrick Knox observed may have actually driven Las Vegas in the direction of their investigation.
And the guy says, well, one of the people who sits here is one of your own guys. What? And so he follows that up. That's Macaulay. But he's finding out that there are a number of other LAPD officers working for Death Row Records, and that there are higher-ups that already know it. It's already been, he goes to his superior who says, yeah, we know that, but that's not going to be in any reports, and, you're not going to make anything public about that. So Knox has pushed back a step, but he still is continuing with his investigation because he's got all these leads that are, he's getting into the Tupac case, he's getting into the Biggie case, he's getting evidence that there are cops, there were lots of cops, including LAPD, present in Las Vegas and even on the scene when Tupac was killed. Implication that they were, helping set it up.
The reason that you've never heard of Ken Knox were because the minute that Ken Knox turned in his reports, the LAPD understood the value of those reports and how damaging they might be. And those reports just disappeared.
Well, that was when he really knew this is serious. He took a vacation, I think it was. And when he came back, he found that his computer had been completely erased. I mean, everything. It was blank. They shut him down, basically. They got him alone in a room and threatened him and told him his career was over. The one thing he did do was pass it on to Russ Poole. When I talked to him, it was clear, he'd made basically I'd made my decision. I decided to save myself. It's not worth, throwing my own life away and, my family, hurting my family for what? To make cases against these gangbangers?
One other reason that the Tim Brennan affidavit tended to gain traction was because Tim Brennan falsely characterized a series of gang shootings that happened as a war that was in retaliation for the shooting of Tupac Shakur.
Our investigation revealed that some of the motivation for the shootings that occurred in Compton may be in retaliation for the events that transpired in Las Vegas.
And in fact, it was stated later that the shootings had nothing to do with the gang war. It's no secret that the Crips and the Bloods were hanging out together and were recording at Death Row Records. But what made it interesting was on the eve of Tim Brennan telling everybody that there was a gang war, 10 Los Angeles police officers showed up at Can-Am Studios to basically hoist a bunch of gang guys out of the studio. What they found was that Bloods were working with Crips at the studio, which was no secret, but that the Crips were East Coast Crips that came from New Jersey. West Coast Bloods working with East Coast Crips. Not much of a gang war there. But even more importantly, if the term East Coast Crips and Crips coming from New Jersey sound familiar, it may be because of something that happened just shortly after that.
It was a criminal organization, be like officers working for the Gambino family.
Yafufula was a name that a lot of people have thrown back in our faces that we were derelict in doing things. Yafufula was interviewed the night of the shooting. Yafufula gave a statement. People say we never interviewed him. He was interviewed. And the big thing is everybody says that he said he could identify the shooter. No, he did not. He never said that to us. He said he might be able to identify the driver. That is what he said. And we tried to reach out to re-interview Yafufula. Well, next thing you know, we're getting notification from, I think it's in Orange, New Jersey, if I remember right, that he's been murdered in a housing project or something like that over some drugs. The problem was, this is a big country. People go wherever, we don't have tracking devices on them. So we have to depend on people that we know we can get in touch with to try and reach out to them.
Immediately after the Yafufula shooting takes place, Compton police and Las Vegas police make it known publicly that the shooting has absolutely nothing to do with the death of Tupac Shakur. Well, that's not exactly true, because the FBI went back several years later and interviewed the New Jersey detectives that worked the Yafufula shooting, and they said that the Yafufula shooting was done execution style, in the style of the mob. The Compton police and death row records had two big problems. Number one, they still weren't able to convince the Vegas police that Orlando Anderson had anything to do with the murder, and Reggie Wright was having trouble trying to convince Frank Alexander to go back and repeat the same lie that he had told Vegas police earlier in the investigation about the chain snatch that occurred that day.
You were supposed to went down to Vegas, me, you, and Malcolm, and plus the statement that you gave about the chain and all of that. With the additional information.
The LAPD had just come out of the Christopher Commission, which was started by the Rodney King beatings, and it had everything to do with police misconduct. So police misconduct was nothing new to the Los Angeles Police Department, but to also have it involving gangs and having it involve an agency that's dealing in drugs like death row would have made a serious black eye for the LAPD.
The LAPD was basically in cover-up mode, self-protection.
Kevin Gaines was in Las Vegas from 2 days prior to the shooting of Shakur until 2 days after the death of Shakur. So what are we going to do? We're going to galvanize this into the public mindset. We're going to make sure they don't forget the Southside Crips. We're going to make sure they don't forget Orlando Anderson. We're going to make sure they don't forget this is an East Coast, West Coast problem. And we're going to do it in such a way that it's big and outrageous and you will never forget it.
Fire department, go ahead. We on Fairfax and Wilshire. What's wrong? We're man shot in our car right now. Okay, they drove up next to us and just shot up the car on the passenger side. Okay, somebody's already on the way. Big, you hear me, baby?
I'm standing outside of the Peterson Auto Museum, the site of the Wallace killings. And they did it. Christopher Wallace murder and the corresponding blame placed on Suge Knight as retaliation for the Orlando Anderson shooting moved light years towards legitimizing the cover story cooked up in September of '96. But in a missed move, the Los Angeles Police Department allowed a rogue felon ex-cop to tell his cellmate the details of how the Wallace killing actually went down. The LAPD tried to hide this inmate's testimony because they had used the same informant's alleged credibility to exonerate at least 5 LAPD officers, and they knew he was not just another jailhouse informant. What you're about to hear was worth $1.1 million to the LAPD to hide from the Wallace family. That's what the judge fined the city for not letting this go out to the public. This is what they did not want you to hear, served up by the very witness whose testimony cleared 5 cops.
My name is Kenneth Bogney, and I was in Linwood County Regional Facility from November 1999
to July 2000. There I befriended Rafael Perez, the LAPD officer who was in the center of the Rampart scandal.
And then I could see the motive was patently obvious. He'd done things that were hanging over him. He could have gone to prison for the rest of his life. He could make a deal to get out from under that. But then he could also get revenge on anybody who had ever offended him in any way.
Rafael Perez never mentioned Suge Knight in name. He just said Dave Kenner and Reggie Wright told him and Mac they would find a guy to get the hit done. So it was the $1 million from Puffy and Notorious B.I.G.
I cheated on my employer, and I cheated on all of you, the people of Los Angeles.
From what I was told, he gave almost $250 grand, up front, and they owed him $750 grand on the back end.
They'd completely hidden Boagny from. So clearly the LAPD took it at least that seriously, that they would hide all mention of Boagny.
The real break in the case was the arrest of David Mack for a bank robbery out in Los Angeles.
David Mack was an LAPD officer. He was arrested for one of the biggest bank robberies in LA history, which he was caught on film committing.
It's been said publicly that David Mack was actually the introduction of the concept that LAPD cops were working for Death Row Records and were working for Suge Knight. And that's not true, because long before David Mack ever robbed that bank, Ken Knox had logs that clearly spelled out who was working for Death Row Records, and those logs were published to Los Angeles Police Department's Internal Affairs in June of 1996, even before the Shakur shooting took place.
And they did a search warrant on his house for the bank robbery. He owned a black SS Impala, and that's the same vehicle that was used in the killing of Biggie Smalls. There's a number of clues that connect David Mack possibly to the killing.
Perez was just along for the ride at the time, going to Death Row meetings when Reggie White, he was pretty much Mack's sidekick at this time. They went and got a mirror to get the job done. And Mack had already knew Amir from being from the Nation of Islam, and they went to school together. He was already in the staff for the Nation of Islam.
So Amir Muhammad comes into the story. Raspur sees that he's had one visitor, and he identifies who this person is, but he basically was trying to cover up who he was. Well, that's suspicious, obviously. And then he looks at the driver's license and sees that the picture looks a lot like the composite drawing that was made of Biggie's shooter.
LA Police Detective Greg Kading came out and said that the reason that Amir Muhammad put a fake Social Security number on the inmate visitor application when he went to visit David Mack was because he did not want his identity stolen.
His explanation was that he was aware that inmates and other people would be able to view or access that log, and he didn't want his identity stolen. This hardly sounds like a professional killer.
And he bought that as a culpable explanation. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're putting your true date of birth and your true address and your true name on the application, you have more chances of identity theft than just a Social Security number. If you're really that concerned about your identity being stolen, you should use a fake date of birth. You should use a fake address. But he didn't. He used true information, and the only thing that he embellished was his Social Security number, and you'd ask your question, why? Well, it's really simple. The Social Security number is the only thing that's not with you when you get your ID checked.
Amir Muhammad in Orange County, under yet another one of his assumed identities, this time he changed himself physically. He had a shaved head now. Didn't look like the Muslim with the fade haircut anymore. He had a shaved head and a beard. But anyway, he'd been arrested for menacing a couple. He was in an SUV, menacing a couple in an SUV with a gun. He pulled out a gun. They pulled up alongside, pointed the gun at him, threatened them. The woman was somebody he'd been involved with, so it wasn't like this wasn't a hit per se. But they called the cops. They pulled him over. He had fake driver's license. He had many aliases. His real name was Harry Billups. He never really, I don't think, legally changed it. I think he still is legally Harry Billups, but he called himself Harry Muhammad, Amir Muhammad. Convicted in that case, but he was convicted on I think that was a misdemeanor. Initially it was a felony. They pleaded it down, but a lot of the reason that he got off was that the couple, who were the only witnesses, a week later were found shot to death. It was ruled by the coroner a murder-suicide. The whole thing seemed dubious to me. You know, this happened well after I wrote Labyrinth, and I found out about this, so I didn't follow it all the way. Somebody should.
I told you that this cat was coming to kill us or try to get at us that night. I told you I had intel.
The night that Notorious B.I.G. was killed, LAPD officer James supposed to cut off both cars, where Biggie was in the car and Sean P. Diddy was in the car. James was supposed to cut both of them guys off.
I told our driver, Kenny, run this next 3 lights. Run the light, Kenny. Kenny ran the light, Big stopped at the light. Big get killed. Wasn't meant for him, bruh.
The whole job didn't get done. One of the guys got away. Of course, Sean Combs got away. He also told me later on that he found out that James was working with Internal Affairs. He couldn't tell Internal Affairs about that, but he was informing them on a lot of other stuff.
So what exactly was Kevin Gaines doing out on that special assignment in Las Vegas?
Red said that was the reason he was killed.
No, it wasn't an accident. He goes, do you have any regrets? I says, yeah. And he leans forward again. He goes, you regret shooting him? I says, no, I regret that he's alone in the truck at the time. Figure that one out. You didn't hear that? Alone in the truck at the time. I could have killed a whole truckload of them. And would have been happily doing so. Derwin and his buddy Kevin Gaines are best friends and running partners. That's how Gaines knew who I was, basically. Henderson was a probationer of mine. And I'd seen them one night in Hollywood. And remember, I had long hair driving a fucking Buick Regal. And I'd seen Henderson in traffic, and we stopped nose-faced. I was going south, he was going north. He had another male black in the car with him, but I didn't pay attention to that guy. I was talking to Derwin. We were partners, and we were saying hi to him and talking to him. Turns out Gaines was with him. They were running partners. That's where Gaines knew me.
Reggie Wright and Dave Kidder informed Mac and Perez that they weren't going to pay for the whole contract, and therefore they had to do the bank robbery to get the money to pay Amir, because Amir was real upset about it. He wasn't taking no for an answer. He wanted his money, and the only recourse was for Dave Mack and Rafael Perez, along with Sammy Martin, to do this bank robbery and get the money to pay Amir, which is the reason why the money wasn't recovered.
Have you had any conversations with Perez at all, either over the phone or in person?
No.
No conversations about what's going on?
No.
How about with Sammy Martin? Have you had discussions with Sam Martin over the phone? Or
no. If the guy has all these girlfriends or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't want that being in the paper on me, so whether that's true or not, I don't see how that...
What's your feeling about him having a girlfriend that's a dope dealer?
Well, I think obviously if that's true, there's a problem with that.
Okay, what's your feeling about him stealing 3 kilos of cocaine out of the streets and out of the property?
Right from the get-go, detectives believed somehow Death Row Records was involved.
Phil Carson was committed to this case. I mean, he had made a case. I mean, he was ready to make arrests. He was convinced that Mack and Muhammad and other LAPD officers had been involved in setting up Biggie's murder. He was all the way in on it. He was ready to file, but his superiors, basically blocked him and eventually took him off it. Just like Kenneth Knox, he was right there, ready to make a case. He was told no. So Carson, basically just like Knox, to save his career, backed off. The first and most significant informant in this case, long before Poole or anybody had heard of Amir Muhammad, Mike Robinson, he worked for the sheriffs mostly, and the sheriffs actually handed him over to Poole and Miller. But and they said, this guy has made cases for us. We've gotten murder convictions, almost entirely based on his. At least we wouldn't have gotten them without him. He said right away that he knew the killer was somebody named Amir or Ashmir or something like that.
I've had cases where I've had individuals confess to a crime, and I go, no, he didn't do it. I know you didn't do it. Why are you telling me you did it when I know you didn't do it? He said, well, it's because their brother did something to somebody in that gang, and the gang said, you know, you got to make up for your brother, so you got to take the hit on it, and they wouldn't relent. They're actually doing prison time for something they didn't do.
Time and time again, you have people who have information, they're put in a situation that's manufactured to make them look like nuts. Now suddenly they're not credible on the other side. They're not nutty about other things. Board of Inquiries, they're not nutty about Iranians bringing in 60 kilos of cocaine. They're not nuts about any of these other things that are going on. They're cops in some cases.
So I met Wayman, and I started to talk with Wayman and meet with Wayman, me and my partner, never alone. And I can tell you is that he never ever gave me any bad information, me or my partner.
One of the guys that was from Morella's law firm, they had my case up in Ocean City. They told me if I did not do what they were asking me to do, they had power to switch my case into another courtroom, which they did. I have it to prove it to you. Right after the deposition, the guy who did the deposition from Morella's law firm, I think that's how you pronounce the law firm.
Yeah, Morella.
Whatever they call it.
Morella, yeah.
They sent the deposition within 4 days to Chuck Phillips. I never signed that deposition. I never approved that deposition. But 4 days after I did the deposition, when they were sending it to the LA Times to go to print with it, I contacted Perry Sanders and told him that I did it underneath threat and it was duress and I would never sign it. They were sending me information, trying to put words in my mouth about other articles. I mean, they wanted me to go along with it, saying Perry Sanders offered me money. Never offered me any money. That came from Don Vince's mouth.
Wow.
And then he threatened my son. He told me I would be put in the hole. So this whole thing came from the city attorney. They had a hard on against Perry Sanders, Mrs. Wallace, and Christopher's estate. They did not like Perry Sanders. They did not want them to get over. They felt on the city of Los Angeles.
But suddenly, when it comes to matters of death row, or it comes to matters of Suge Knight, or it comes to matters of the Wallace investigation or LAPD corruption, these guys are bonkers now. Anybody with half a brain can see what's going on here. Let's suppose for a minute that we say these guys aren't nuts. Let's say we take in face value what these guys had to say. Before they were tampered with, before they were threatened, before Chuck Phillips got to them.
Probably going to write the story by the end of next week. And I just think that would be, if I want to be able to bring that up in the story, but it would be much better to bring it up if you were part of it. You know what I mean? If you just would say, hey, I would, I mean, you don't have to say I can identify the guy. All you have to say is I would go to a line. You know? Because they've not even done that. And they're trying to act like they have done it. You know what I mean? Or that there's no reason to do it.
Yeah, you know, that's a question I'm not going to answer, Jack, one way or another.
Before the LAPD got to them, before they had an opportunity to be dissuaded somehow.
We have been told numerous times by numerous people, including police officers, that they're afraid to come forward.
First, we have to look at what they said originally, then we look at how they were tampered with, because this is witness tampering. Let's call it what it is. These people had reliable information. They had a track record of provable, reliable information. They get tampered with. Now, all of a sudden, they're afraid to talk. Their stories are changing. They're not right about certain facts that they had been absolutely concrete sure of before. And how does that not stink?
And they wanted a gang expert, because there were some gang issues in there, and I've been known and still am as a gang expert in the defense world also. So they called me, and I went down and talked to them about the case and told them, yeah, I'd be glad to work on it with you and be more than happy. So I got retained and started working on it and got into it and found out that, well, I don't understand the gang issues. There's no real gang involvement in this. And I'm basically there as a police practices expert at that time in court. And so they're having discussion and testimony about, informants and things and cating and all that, and he's up there and testifying and whatnot. And then the defense calls me, and I get on the witness stand, and they're asking me. And I said, yeah, this is how you deal with informants. This is a department protocol, and there's a manual. There wasn't when I was on, but there is now. And the judge turned over and asked me, he says, well, what is your assessment, or how do you feel that Detective Katie handling of these informants? And I said, he sounded like he was totally out of control and totally out of policy to me, Your Honor. He did not follow the correct procedure. And he goes, okay. And then the judge told the U.S. attorney that I want to see the informant manual. Well, there isn't one, Your Honor. Kading's telling the federal prosecutor there is no such thing. Well, we know there is. And he said, I want that manual in my office in 1 hour. And they went and got it. And so that basically put Kading in a real cross, because he has testified that there is no such thing. And there was. But the federal prosecutor believed Kading that there wasn't anything, and there was. And then you saw exactly what I laid out as to how it's to be handled. Well, come to find out, and I listened to a lot of the tapes of him and his informants. Why he taped himself, I'll never know. Because he's promising these guys houses and money and all these things. I need you to say this, I need you to say, and then I have phone conversations of the informant telling other guys, yeah, all I had to do, I have to say this, and that. I'm at $400,000. I'm going to get a $500,000 home. I'm going to be living there. I'm going to be living high on the hog. I'm going to be doing it, bro, and all this. And I'm like, you can't promise people anything. You can't buy informants. You can't offer them anything for that. You have to tell them that I can't give you any. I have no authority to give you anything. I would
believe that. So you're going to get $500,000 if you testify like that. Who would believe him anyway? I mean, really, are they that gullible?
Well, it was on tape. You didn't have to believe him. It was on tape. That's why I don't understand why he taped himself when he visited these guys alone. He never had a partner with him, and he never had a witness or anything, but he taped himself. He even taped himself on the phone, and I just don't understand the mentality of someone that's a seasoned officer or detective that he knows they're taping this. My understanding is that when the case was, almost all the charges were dismissed. There were some minor bookkeeping things the feds had on Torres, and he got some real tiny conviction on some housekeeping and bookkeeping things or something, and everything else was dismissed. The murder, the drug, all that stuff was all kicked out, was not guilty by jury. And then the judge informed Kading that I don't ever want to know or see or hear of you being in the federal court building, or you're never allowed in my courtroom ever again. And made mention to the U.S. attorney that he feels that they should contact the department and let them know, what had transpired here.
Were you around when they said that?
Yeah.
You were there?
Yeah, and so that's all I know. And then I never saw or heard of Katie again.
Right.
I've seen this with other detectives at LAPD on other cases in state court where they were caught in a lie on the witness stand, and the judge whitewashed it as they were just embellishing. They weren't really lying. And then when it gets back to the department, they slap their hand like, well, you can't be in homicide for 3 or 4 weeks, and then he's right back in. It's like nothing happens. Like any public entity, they don't want to take a hit in public that puts the reputation or anything of the department down. And so it's a common practice with just about anywhere. They don't want to take that kind of hit, unless they have to, like, the black eye from Rafael Perez, to where in my era, if I was caught lying on the witness stand, it would have been the end of my career. I would have been fired. They wouldn't have whitewashed. They would have fired me, because as that point of you lying, you are no longer any use to the department because you cannot testify on any case anymore. You're not trustworthy anymore. They can't use you anymore because you've already lied on the record in a courtroom, and therefore you have no credibility anymore, so therefore they can't use you. But it seemed like nobody cared.
You have to understand that Greg Kading admitted in 2011, and several years after he was off the police department, that he personally had not seen any of the evidence that had been presented in discovery. Well, what was the entire nature of the Wallace lawsuit? The entire nature of the Wallace lawsuit was that cops were involved, and that David Mack was involved, and that Rafael Perez was involved, and that Amir Muhammad was involved. That was the entire scope of the Wallace investigation. So if you're a detective and you've seen nothing that puts forward any new evidence or any new information to support that theory, how in the world can you say you've actually investigated it at all?
If you do not include Box B along with Box A, and explain everything in those boxes, of course, you're an incompetent investigator, 1. 2, you're a fraudulent investigator, and you've just disgraced the law enforcement code of ethics.
Greg Kading and some other people that he was affiliated with put that letter online, and then started immediately saying, oh, how ridiculous this is. Oh, here goes RJ Bond again. But again, like I said, nobody really has come back with, other than, oh, that's silly.
You haven't considered Box B and the evidence in there. That could refute and change everything. So your investigation is not complete.
I've talked to the U.S. attorneys out here that had that Kading case, and he's like, his name is Mud.
It turns out a few months after the Biggie Smalls killing that there was actually a secret bid auction for helicopters that the Compton Police Department owned. One of the bidders on this secret bid, that was a sealed bid, was the city of Las Vegas.
Vegas has to be told to shut up. They have to be hushed. Because when they're going to get pinched in a corner, if the FBI rocks over too many cases, they're not going to be able to basically contain what they believe to be the truth about it. And I think that was always the veiled threat. Hey, you push us too hard, we're going to tell about the whole stinking affair. We know it exists. Anybody with half a brain can see what's going on here. And if you really wanted to go in that direction, we can push it that way. That's when Compton said, well, let's change our tact a little bit. Maybe we won't push so hard. Maybe we won't say you guys are dummies. In fact, why don't we give you something nice? Why don't we treat you good? Why don't we give you something that you can turn around and flip and make a little bit of a profit on? The city council just knew that the helicopters were to be declared surplus. The city council has no idea what helicopters do, and they're not in the helicopter business, so they wouldn't know how much these helicopters were worth. And so if you're going to give them away to Vegas, give them away to Vegas. Sure, no problem.
How about the helicopter?
That went to Vegas? Man, I'm telling you, the night of that meeting, I'm getting the city of Las Vegas budget is damn near $1 billion a year. Our budget is $163 million. And we selling them a helicopter? We had a 4-seat jet helicopter cost $1 million.
And you're talking about a helicopter? Give me a break.
From the looks of it, it doesn't appear that that transaction was actually sanctioned in any kind of a city council or budget meeting in the city of Las Vegas.
So that's what we're doing.
So we're looking for records of a helicopter transfer.
If there was an exchange of a helicopter from Compton PD to LVM PD, you're never going to find it in LVM PD. You won't find it. Those documents are destroyed, and that tracking of that money is just about as hard to track that money as it is to the police radio system money. It's non-existent anymore.
It's bought, it stays off the books, and no one has any idea that this helicopter was purchased.
So we hear that they got this brand spanking new $50,000 helicopter engine, and they don't read the instruction manual, and they burn it up right there on the pad. So there's another $50,000 right out the door, and it was right around this same time frame. I'm just wondering if there was some kind of connection.
From the looks of it, it doesn't appear that that transaction was actually sanctioned in any kind of a city council or budget meeting in the city of Las Vegas.
This wasn't a grand conspiracy, but rather a few individuals that were very good at gaming the system. After Tupac was dead, and having missed their opportunity to kill Suge Knight, the conspirators put him in prison so they could rape and plunder Death Row Records. They were able to sell most of their crimes, leading up to the murders, as a gang thing that was unsolvable. When the narrative didn't gain traction, they elevated the narrative by killing Biggie as an East Coast-West Coast feud that was equally unsolvable. They sold this narrative through Tim Brennan's affidavit. Then they sold it through Chuck Phillips' LA Times articles. As the truth began to emerge in Biggie and Tupac and the Wallace civil trials, they suppressed the truth in the first trial and used Wayman Anderson to sell the narrative and derail the second trial. To galvanize this narrative, they used an ex-LAPD cop to sell it yet again. They'll do anything to obfuscate the truth and sell you this murder as unsolvable, in spite of hundreds of witnesses in very public places, because they are still gaming the system.
I don't take any criticism of the Los Angeles Police Department or any criticism against law enforcement lightly, because my family was a family of cops. My grandfather was on the Los Angeles Police Department. My father was on the Los Angeles Police Department. I knew cops every day, and it makes me sad to think that these people that are involved in these crimes have sullied the reputation of great men and women that are out there, because there are a lot of them out there.
The only way police misconduct can occur is if it is condoned and tolerated by upper police management. That's it. That's the bottom line.
There were no convictions as a result of the Compton PD investigation. There were no convictions for the Tupac Shakur killing. There were no convictions for the Biggie Smalls killing. There were no convictions for the acts of very bad people. And now, the lack of conviction and the lack of prosecution against certain individuals that we know did some really bad things are being used as a rationalization and a justification that they're actually good people. The reality is that Al Capone was never charged with murder. Al Capone was charged with tax evasion. Did it mean there weren't people that were dead as a result of Al Capone? Yeah, there were. But he was never charged with murder. And if that's going to be our rationale as a society, well, I didn't get caught, so it must be okay, then we have a long way to go.
Do it the right way. Reduce to 3 words: be high-minded. 3 more words: remain high-minded. That's the message I want them given to people before, not after, they've faced the first fork in the road. Do I do the right thing today, or do I go off the path? And do I become corrupt today?
Hey, dude.
Hey, man, what's up? We gotta check the audio levels on this bad boy.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me just,
I don't think you're coming in that great.
Alright, hold on a second
How far are we into the show?
We're live. So we just started. The movie just ended. We're live. So I'm checking the audio real quick, just to make sure. You sound a little like you're not coming through your headset mic.
Right.
Checking the audio real quick. You sound a little like that.
Okay. What about now? Any different?
No.
Any different now? How about now? Can you hear me any better now?
No. No. There's I mean, I can hear you. We can do it. There's just a lot of feedback from the USB mic. It's not coming through your headset.
Oh, it's not? Okay, then you know what? Let me change that then real quick. My bad. Oh, it's not? Okay, then you know what? Let me change that then real quick. My bad.
Anyway, guys, I'm reading your comments, and the buzzing noises on RJ's end. It's some kind of mic that he's using. He does have the fart gun too close to the equipment. What's up, Danny? Tell everybody I said hi and I love him. I actually know Danny, guys. He's a friend of mine. He is family. But what's up, Supreme and Bobby Ray and everybody else? You figured that out yet, RJ? Because we can just do it live.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. We're golden.
All right.
We're good.
We're good. Yes. Nice. Let the fleshlight. Yeah, no, I wore it out. Sorry, guys.
Oh, it had a squeaker left.
It did. No, the fleshlight. He said I wore the fleshlight out. I'll have to tell you what a fleshlight is offline. The fact that I even know about that sucks. What's up, guys? What's happening? What's good with everybody on the team? Jesse, good to see you, buddy.
I got my official Bob's Big Boy shirt.
Very nice.
It makes me feel official, like a referee with whistle. So I guess we're
Home
gonna get
team.
into this thing.
Digging it, dude. I think I'm gonna go as Bob's Big Boy for Halloween because I kind of fit the profile. I got the gut like the Bob's Big Boy. I just need the hair. I don't have any hair.
No doubt.
So how did everybody like the show? What was the feedback? Everybody liked the show? Everybody see something that they didn't get to see before?
It just depended on when they tuned in. A lot of people, actually, a friend of mine, a family member, Danny, was on here watching it, and Danny and Nicole, and I think it's probably the first time they've seen it, so they were enjoying it. They said that there was a lot of deep rabbit holes, and it was kind of cool to watch them kind of watch it for the first time. But there was a lot of there's a lot more faces coming around here, and it looks like there's a bit of a tide turning. The more of this information that goes out, it seems the more people that are starting to tune in.
Well, we just got to keep the word out about it. I mean, this is the good news about what we're doing is I think we're making traction. I think that we're talking what people want to hear. This isn't a dead-end theory that we can just sit back and re-scratch the old surface. So I'm very happy that the gang's around here. No, I don't have my mustache back yet. I don't know. We should take a lottery and see if I should grow my mustache back or not. But I'm kind of thinking about doing that. I had the Freddie Mercury mustache there for a while, but we'll have to see.
You make a Raleigh Fingers mustache that you can twirl at the ends.
I can't grow that kind of mustache for some reason. I don't know why. The hair just it doesn't do that. It won't go that long. It just falls out. That's the problem. So all right, so let's talk about some questions. Let's see here. What do we got? We got good questions.
Well, I kind of wanted to. Do you want to go ahead and address the elephant in the room? Can I drop the Frank Alexander question on you? That everybody.
Oh yes. Oh the I sued Frank Alexander's wife. Yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. Sure, why not?
Yeah, RJ. For those asking real quick, I am drinking Stella Aquarius. I don't know, but pay me, Stella. Send me a check. You can get my address.
Yeah, I'm drinking water because it's good for my health.
But yeah,
what's up, peeps? What's up, fam?
To get back on the serious note, I mean, I keep getting spammed with this on my YouTube. You sued Frank Alexander's wife. 303 in the crowd?
No, not 303. 313 is though. 303 hasn't made it yet.
Yeah.
Agent 313. All right. So, what up? Well, all right. So there has been a rumor that has been put out. I think it's kind of a vicious attack that's been put out, and it has, said basically. I mean, the gist of it is that I'm such a despicable person that I sued Frank Alexander's wife. That's the kind of human being I am. That how could I? Frank Alexander was my friend for 20 years, and how could I sue his wife? And the truth of the matter is, and we'll just address it. In fact, I was looking to see if I actually had the paperwork sitting here in front of me. I don't know if I do. Hold on a second, I might. If I don't, it's no big deal. I'll find it later. But anyway, all right. Well, here's the deal. You like it? I'm so unprofessional. I'm like digging through my shit while we're doing an interview live.
No, I thought maybe you were going to do your taxes.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, that would be more interesting, wouldn't it? That way it can show how much money I didn't pay certain people.
Shout out to Rel at 313 Live Show. Go sub to his channel. Check out his new website. I love his content personally, and I'm seeing a lot of friendly faces over there. Shout out to him. He always supports us. So go support Rel at 313 Live Show. That is a website. If you want to spam it, go ahead, Rel. And also a YouTube channel. Check it out, people.
All right, Jason Griffin, go to another channel. If you're going to say that kind of crap, just go to another channel. So anyway, here's the deal. And is Mike still in the house? Is Mike Famey still around? Is our moderator still here? I don't know if he made it today or not.
No, All About Asia's here, but she stepped away.
No, that's all right. No worries.
I took care of him.
Yeah. All right. So check this out. There's been talk that I sued Frank Alexander's widow, and they threw up a cover sheet for a civil lawsuit. And the funny thing about it is that the front page that they put up there doesn't have Frank Alexander's wife's name anywhere on it. It's just a bunch of bullshit. Here's what happened, and it's a normal thing. It happens a lot. When Frank Alexander died, he didn't tell me he was going to die a day before, a week before, a month before. He didn't tell me he was going to die. And so when he died, it was a surprise to everybody. When he died, however, we were in the middle of recutting his old movie Before I Wake. We were actually taking bits and pieces and cutting them out because he didn't want them in there anymore. It didn't reflect where he was at in his life. And in addition to that, we had a great beginning and just a whole lot of new stuff that we were putting in there as well. And we were giving it a refresh. Whenever you go to a distributor to get a movie distributed, you have to have what they call clear title, which means that if they start distributing your movie, suddenly it comes up and somebody says, hey, that movie's really mine. It's not really his to sell. And then you have litigation, and the distributor gets mad, and they withhold money. And at the end of the day, they just don't pay you because you're using somebody else's stuff. So what's happened is, Frank passed away. We're in the middle of working on the projects. The second thing that happened at the same time that Frank died was what we were also getting ready to do the re-releases of Assassination Parts 1 and 2. Not to dive too deep into this, but to talk about copyrights for a minute. You can copyright in any name you want to. You can use your own name. You can use the name of your company. A company can copyright. Anybody can copyright material. And in the case of the assassination movies were just were just in the name of Steppin' Up Enterprises, which was Frank's company. Now, Frank had his wife as an officer of the company. She resigned as an officer of the company. And, but it was largely Frank's defunct company. It's been suspended for years because the company didn't pay its taxes on time and it got seized by the Franchise Tax Board. But at any rate, when Frank died, there was a problem regarding title in the movies. And in the case of movies that have title that's ambiguous, you have to take measures to clear title. And you do that by filing a lawsuit, which I did. I filed a lawsuit against Steppin' Up Enterprises, Inc., not Debbie Alexander. I didn't sue Debbie Alexander. And at the end of the day, I did that with the specific intent to clear title for the movies. And also, the second thing is there was money that was still due to be paid on production costs and distribution costs, manufacturing costs, that hadn't been recouped yet from the 2013 releases. I think we spent close to $40,000 re-editing those movies at an editing studio in North Hollywood and putting them together. And what would allow me legally to be able to recoup those funds or to withhold those funds and not pay Steppin' Up Enterprises as a joint copyright holder would be to get a judgment so that way I had the right to retain the money and recoup the money and clear title on the movies at the same time. Now, that's it. That is the radical.
So you didn't go after her for some kind of monetary judgment, or you didn't go after her for anything other than put out the movies?
No, she wasn't listed as a defendant in the lawsuit. If I was going to sue her, I would have sued her. In fact, because I sued the corporation, legally I can't go after her at all. I can't do anything with her. The only money I can get is from Steppin' Up Enterprises, and I got to fight the Franchise Tax Board for that. So that's it. I mean, there's no personal intent there. I mean, believe me, if I had a judge Alexander, everybody would know it.
What makes these guys think that, like, when they say that you are some cold-hearted suing guy, that you wouldn't do it to them?
Well, that's a good question. It clearly shows that they don't believe the shit they're shoveling themselves, because if they thought that I was a despicable enough person that I would sue the wife of my business partner of 20 years, what makes them think that they're any less culpable or that they're not going to get sued and I'm not going to sue their asses off? Because if I'm willing to do it to the wife of my best friend and godfather of my son, these people are nothing to me. So they'll get sued in a drop of a hat. If that's really if they really believed what they were saying, they would govern themselves completely different, and they probably would say shit about it. But it's easy to take shots at it because the people that put this information out have absolutely no problem putting out bullshit. They just throw shit against the wall. If it sticks, it sticks, but none of it's true, and they deal with lies. So that's it. I mean, that's really as much as it comes to. I wish I could say there was some there, but there's nothing there. There was a lawsuit that was filed against Steppin' Up Enterprises Incorporated. There was a judgment granted against Steppin' Up Enterprises, and that judgment allowed me to clear right and title to the movies that Frank and I put together that we worked on. It allowed me to redistribute those movies. It allowed me to recoup expenses that I had spent, that Frank hadn't spent, that I had spent in actually putting the movies together. And that's just a normal part of distribution. It's a business deal. That's the right way to go about solving your problems, is to go to court and deal with it legally. And I would encourage people to do that. That's it.
Well, and I apologize for dragging your personal information through the beginning of the live stream, but that's the most, spam comment. So I was just kind of curious to what your thoughts were on that. And where I don't even really know the origin of that, to be honest.
Well, I'm going to just realize that you sued the company. It says two directors, Frank and his wife. Well, Frank's wife resigned as a director, and if you'll notice that she resigned as a director after the lawsuit was filed. But again, a director is not held personally responsible for the debts of a company. That's dumb, and you should probably learn a little bit more about the subject matter you're talking about before you venture a statement about it, because at the end of the day, no director of a company is liable for the acts of the company itself. And when you get a judgment against the company, it does not mean you get a judgment against the directors of the company. So it really doesn't matter. if Debbie Alexander was the director of a company. And again, I don't want to get too much more into the gory details of it because we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Tupac. We're here to talk about the investigations and not whether or not I'm running around suing my friend. And again, like I said, if anybody out there thinks that I'm man enough or ballsy enough or despicable enough to sue my best friend's wife, take heed because you'll be next.
Well, Supreme made a good comment. He said he wanted to low-key check, realize his profile, and see if he's new. He's new. Yeah, that guy's new. So don't get trolled, RJ.
Agent provocateur.
Another good question that D-Block had. He asked about, what is your knowledge of the allegations that Mike Dorsey redid the murder rap documents? Were those, because we've spoke on this before, in your opinion, were the murder rap documents that they've put out, are those legitimate? What's your opinion on that?
Are you talking about the stuff that Kading put online? The cover sheet that proved that
Keith Davis cover sheet.
Yeah, we've looked at those documents 4 ways till Sunday. I don't know whether or not Dorsey wasn't even around when those documents put up. Those documents were just forgeries. They're altered documents. They're fake. There's about 5 different things that are wrong with them and inconsistent with them. They'd never passed the muster. You got different fonts. You got different information. And you can clearly see where information was literally cut and pasted and dropped into other things. It's one of the worst forgeries I've seen. And bottom line is it's bullshit, another bogus document that they threw out there in a panic because people weren't believing what they said. You know, we've been saying since day one, Jesse, I mean, if you have documents, put them out. If you've got it, let's see all the documents. Let's not just see a few lines from the top half of a page and then nothing else and everything else is blanked out. I mean, that's really, you show me that, you're showing me nothing. Show the real documents. If you've got something to say, show the real documents. So that's just what it is all about. Again, this is something that is a very easy thing to do. If you have a document and this document says this, put the document out, flat out. So anyway, that's that's what I would have to say. In my personal opinion, in my professional opinion, all we've seen from Mr. Kading as far as documents go, real documents, is a couple of forgeries, a couple of bogus documents that went up back in the early days before Dorsey ever came along. And it's also kind of funny because maybe Dorsey and company don't actually know what a pan and scan is. They actually don't know how to take a document, put it in a video, and actually make that video show the documents, because the movie Murder Rap was very, very light in any kind of documents at all. And that's why we in Assassination, is it sometimes kind of hard to look at documents? Yeah, it's kind of hard. Maybe it's a little bit dry, but at the end of the day, I'd rather give you the information and it be a little dry than try to baffle you or bamboozle you with bullshit. Period.
Well, what's your opinion, and have you heard any news about the Keith Davis interview? Because I've heard some buzz about it. A couple people mentioned it in the chat. Have you heard anything about Keith Davis's interview?
I've heard that nobody's bought it. I've heard that it's just floated around out there. They were marketing it a couple years ago pretty heavily. And, it hasn't showed up in any video. It hasn't showed up anywhere. So, and again, it just goes because, first off, you got to understand something. I struggled a lot. When we did the first 2 assassination movies, I didn't want to get on camera at all because I don't think I'm particularly all that, A, attractive, and B, somebody didn't want to look at me for, hours at a time, and B, I don't know that I come across very well on camera. And so for that reason, Frank came across a lot better, and we interviewed Frank a lot more, and Frank did a lot of the heavy lifting on parts 1 and 2. When we went to do part 3, I felt like with Frank that it was easier for me to tell the story in some cases than it was for somebody else to tell them. And of course, I've been accused of spoon-feeding people information, and I don't do that. Person says what they have to say, and if I want to say something, I'll say it myself. So that said, I went ahead and I did that, but I was very self-conscious about whether or not I wanted to video, shoot myself doing these question and answers, and so that became a real decision point. You know what? And I just completely blanked on your question. What was your question? Sorry, dude. Turn your microphone on.
I kind of got lost in your answer. I'm preloading questions in advance. We were talking about the Keefe D project.
Right. Okay. There you go. All right. So back to that. Okay. So yeah, I knew that I'm not a good-looking dude, and I may or may not be particularly watchable to some people. Keith Davis is not an attractive man. Keith Davis is not a good-looking man, and I'm not sure that you would actually want to sit and spend 25 minutes looking at Keith Davis's face giving an interview. I'm not sure that that makes good television.
Yeah, Keith Davis is an ugly son of a bitch.
Well, I mean, it's just he's you know, a personable guy. You meet him, he's kind of likable, but at the same time, that doesn't translate on camera. And so, and anybody who watched that trailer that Keith Davis was in kind of gave it away right away. So I really think that regardless of how valuable the information that he was in, he would have basically have said, you know, that he found John Gotti's body or he had something to do with it, or had a smoking gun in his hand to be interesting enough for somebody to pay the kind of money that E1 was asking for that interview. I mean, they wanted to be paid a lot of money for Keith Davis's interview. So if they're searching for that money, the first thing the TV station is going to do is say, man, can people actually stomach looking at this guy for 25 minutes? Sure, he's got something to say, but can they really afford to look at this guy? So that's why I kind of honestly think that that's kind of where the interview kind of began and ended.
Yeah, to me, the clip that I seen that was up online for a little while, I just don't know how they were going to sell a documentary about the guy confessing to killing Tupac. Because what I mean, I don't understand what audience that would serve, but hey, maybe there's some true life fans. One person who just seen the movie for the first time, he asked, how many of the police department testimonies were scratched from the record and why? I wanted to tackle a little bit of that. Danny, what I think is going on is it's not being scratched from the record as it's being omitted from current narratives, like other books and projects. They're just omitting certain testimony and they're cherry picking different informants and saying, like the movie was showing you, that for a lot of different reasons they would ping these informants as not credible when it suited them. So I think it's not that they were being scrubbed, it's just they're lying by omission by not these projects by not showing you the whole testimony, if that helps.
Yeah, I'm not sure I kind of understood the question. I think that the question was, are documents being omitted? Do you mean omitted from our movie or omitted from the police department? I mean, you got to realize something else, Jess.
No, he just means from the narrative that to get the answers that they're trying to.
Oh, well, I mean, because I can also speak to the other thing. Russ Poole said it very clearly. The LAPD were deleting documents right and left. They were deleting documents. They were deleting witness testimony. I mean, they were going through the computers, and that was the testimony of the LAPD cop that had all of his records purged. His name blanks out right at this minute. But the guy that Ken. Okay, I'll think of his name in a minute.
Ken Knox?
Yeah, Ken Knox, thank you. Ken Knox's stuff was deleted. All of his computer files were deleted by the LAPD, so they went through a lot of stuff, and even Greg Kading said in his book Murder Rap that when they took over the files had been shredded and torn through and were just disassembled and were a big mess because the LAPD came in there and Internal Affairs started pulling documents out and pulling information out. So the truth of the matter is, as far as the Wallace case goes, we really have no idea still what documents have been omitted. We do know for a fact that there were documents omitted because we have the documents that Ken Knox gave to Russ Poole and said, hold on to these because these documents may very easily disappear, and sure enough, they did. So that's really, and Ken Knox gave a sworn statement in the Wallace civil trial to that effect, that he had documents that were never recovered, that were never back part of the pile again. So that's the case. The Ken Knox logs that we used in Battle for Compton were not part of the Wallace records, the Wallace file. And there's a chance that Greg Kading may never have seen the Kendrick Knox log files because the LAPD took them and they disappeared. So that's true. And so maybe even if you're asking the other question, whether or not documents have been purged, yes, they have been, in fact. So so Jesse's absolutely correct. Documents have been left out of the narrative for the convenience of the people making the narrative. And also documents have literally disappeared from the LAPD.
Another longtime supporter had asked that he wanted the rundown, if you could, of the significance of Dorsey taking Greg Kading off of the actual murder rap paperwork documents. That was his question.
Okay. Well, so we'll talk a little bit more about copyrights today. All right. The copyright to the movie Murder Rap is actually, when you have a copyright, that's what gives you license under federal law to make copies of and or sell or distribute a motion picture. You don't have to have a copyright filed with the federal government. However, if somebody violates your copyright, you do have it filed with the federal government, you can actually have statutory damages, which are very, very good to have when you're going after somebody. The second thing, though, about copyrights is you could have what's called just a poor man's copyright. And that means the minute that you publish something publicly, you have a copyright. So you file a federal copyright to make sure that it's laid down and written for all time. It's documented for all time. The copyright to the movie Murder Rap is actually owned by a company called Murder Rap LLC. It's a limited liability California corporation. And when it was founded back in its early days, when it was first created, there were two people that made up the partners for this limited liability corporation. And that was Greg Kading and Mike Dorsey. Those two people were part of it. Now, most recently in the filings that I've seen anyway, the filings for Murder Rap, when you go periodically through the California Department of Corporations or any state you file corporate listings, if there's a change in officers of the company or change in people who own the company or change in the structure of the company as far as ownership, you have to allow the Secretary of State to know that, because that does show, by the way, when we talked about ownership earlier with Debbie Alexander and directors, a director is not an owner of a corporation. But in an LLC, unlike a C corporation, an LLC, it is actually owned and managed by its members or its partners. It's a limited liability. That's why they call it limited liability, because each partner might have liability, but it's limited and it's split up. So what you have there at the end of the day is you have Greg Kading and Mike Dorsey, who were partners, and they made up the Murder Rap company. The latest Murder Rap LLC filings show just Mike Dorsey at a different address than what they'd filed before. I don't know if maybe it's his apartment or whatever, his one-bedroom apartment in Hollywood where he lives, or his basement of his mom's house. I don't really know what the address is, but at any rate, Dorsey filed it. He filed it completely by himself. So the downstream impact of that, what that means is that the company that owns the copyright for the movie Murder Rap doesn't have Greg Kading as a member partner anymore. Mike Dorsey took him off. He could have just renewed it and left Greg Kading on as a partner, a member of that LLC. According to the state records, he didn't do that. So, whether or not they've got some handshake agreement or a contract off to the side that Kading gets paid, but Dorsey owns it, Greg Kading has no personal interest in the copyright for Murder Rap LLC other than whatever agreement he's got with Mike Dorsey to pay him or whatever the case might be. But as far as the federal copyright goes and as far as the membership in the LLC goes, Greg Kading has divested himself from that copyright.
I guess a reaching man would say that it's funny after the Reggie Wright indictment that he's distancing himself from Murder Rap. I'll throw my speculation out there. I'm not afraid to do it. But
sure.
In a nutshell, it's definitely weird that all of a sudden Greg Kading's not appearing on the paperwork. But I don't know the answer to that. I just think it's very strange. All About Asia's back.
Hey, Easy.
Welcome back.
Yep. Hey, Easy. Let's see. Who else have we got going there? Let's see here. Slang and Pillows. Let's see. What do we got here? I'm jumping back, guys, by the way.
Danny asked how many documents are available to the public in regard to Pac's death and shooting, or are they sealed? I can answer a part of that, and Rel from 313 Live Show can too. Go check him out. Subscribe. But it's kind of difficult to get those files. They make you jump through hoops, and usually the stuff that they're giving you would be redacted if you even get to that point. RJ, did you ever try to get files from Las Vegas?
From the Las Vegas Police Department? Yeah, we went to the Las Vegas Police Department and talked with them. Vegas PD is not giving up the files on an ongoing criminal investigation. It's that simple. Why would they? Because whatever information they're going to give up is either going to be run up the flagpole. And by the way, that's a great point that you just brought up. And let's talk for a quick second about why police departments don't give up documents generally, okay? Because there are people that are out there that will take a document that looks typically normal and is a regular document, and somebody handwrote something at the bottom of it, and then they misread or misinterpret what the handwriting is at the bottom of it, and they make a YouTube video with some outrageous allegations that this document did or didn't say this, and they start a whole bunch of hype on the internet about it. And again, that's why the police don't put these documents out, and it's probably to the bane of the prosecution that these court documents on PACER are actually online, because it's probably a headache that they get people doing these things, because at the end of the day, all it does is fuck with the investigation. And so Vegas has been very protective of the documents, and they can, people, you know, the easy way out is to say, well, they're not interested, and that's why they're holding on to the documents. No, they're holding on to the documents to preserve the chain of evidence, to preserve the dignity of the documents. They're not happy about the fact that the documents got out through Russ Pool and through the LAPD, and they're not happy that the documents made it into people's hands like me, that the interviews are out there. They're not happy about that because, again, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different things you can do with that information. LAPD leaked the confession letter because they wanted to warn the people that were being accused in the confession letter about things. They wanted to warn them, hey, you're being outed here, so if somebody comes to your door and asks you questions, you'll know the reason why. Vegas doesn't want that kind of stuff. They're stuck with it because a lot of documents in the early stages did get out. What else they have that they didn't give out, I don't know. But, I mean, you got to imagine there's probably a lot more documents there than what we have. You know, we don't have them all. So, yes, they're being locked up. Russ said when he went to the Vegas PD that there were literally an entire rack of books dealing with the Tupac Shakur investigation, several different binders. So, you know, we may have a binder and a half worth, but, you know, there's 8 or 9 binders worth of material. I haven't seen it. So that's...
When you have people from the murder rap investigation that are withholding evidence from Las Vegas, it doesn't really surprise me that they'd be kind of, you know, tight-lipped on what they know.
Yeah. Again, you know, it's up to them to preserve the chain of custody. That's really what it comes down to. It's up to them to do that. So, you know, they are either going to just throw a bunch of documents out wherever and let them land where they land, or leak them, or do whatever, and then you're not going to have an airtight case. You're going to have a compromised case because the documents are out there and people are already commenting on them. You know, it's kind of like if it's out there, any prospective juror could have seen it, and if they've seen it, they may have formed an opinion about it already. And if they formed an opinion about it already, that they can't be a juror. And so our system of selecting jurors based on this blank slate, that they don't know anything and that they're seeing all this information for the first time, if they already have a predisposed opinion about it, they're not going to be a good juror. They may not be good for the prosecution, or they may not be good for the defense because they already have an opinion about it. And that's kind of why they keep that stuff wrapped up.
Is that why Gary Jones asked, with all that you have, why no DA would take the case?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why no DA would take the case. You know, Brett Becker was the one who said that even if the guy walked into the police station, laid a murder weapon down on the table and said, I'm the one who shot Tupac Shakur, confessed to it, and even if that was the gun, he still has to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt in a jury of his peers in a court of law. And to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, that means nobody can doubt it for a minute. So when you have all these idiots running around saying that Tupac is still alive, all they need to do is introduce that into the mix. And this guy's not going to jail. He can confess to it all day long, but he's not going to go to jail because they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, not just say it, but prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person really killed Tupac Shakur, even though he said he did. Because we have a lot of people, especially in the hip-hop and rap community, running around making a bunch of claims about stuff that they didn't really do. So, you know, that's really how you have to watch it, and that's what you have to be careful of. That's part of the reason why we went to the LAPD with the confession letter, because this guy was confessing to being a part of a murder, and this was a written confession. And so if you think maybe we want to prosecute these guys, or maybe these guys might have really done it, then you take it to the police that can actually go gather other evidence and go interview other people around it before they ever confronted the Pattons. Maybe people that knew him. Maybe they're next door neighbors. They're their old next door neighbors. You know, what were these guys like? What did they do? Maybe other people that they talked to about that killing before they actually even went to talk to the Pattons, and they would have had all their background information, their background work done. And in this case, that's why they leaked the letter, because they wanted to stop anybody from doing that. Okay. Now, for example, I saw a video where Mike Carlin went out to Little Half Dead's house and looked for Little Half Dead. Okay. Mike went to Long Beach and did that. He did that years ago. Okay. This wasn't a recent thing. This didn't just happen yesterday. This happened years ago, right after we got the letter, and I want to say it was after Russ and I went to the LAPD and the letter got leaked. I'd have to double check on that. But, and clearly that's, Michael wasn't officially involved with the project. He was involved with Russ and I, but his name hadn't been put on the book yet. If memory serves, I could be wrong about, but I'm pretty sure that when he went and did that the book wasn't. And again, I'm not saying anything bad about it. Mike did, he was ballsy enough to go there and do it, and that was, kudos to him for doing that. But I want to say that was done before his name was out there publicly as being involved with the Tupac project. So he probably could have said, "I'm Michael Carlin, Little Half Dead, who the hell are you? Who are you?" And it wouldn't have registered. Unfortunately, RJ Bond can't necessarily go around the hood saying the same thing, because people know my politics one way or another. So, Omar Bradley said that. He goes, "I've been waiting for you to come to see me for a long time," just because he knew who I was by name. So that's kind of what's been going on with that.
But yeah, Gary, I guess that to answer your question in a nutshell, no DA is going to touch the case because there's too much reasonable doubt, and there is a consistent pouring of bad information on the internet, which would cause a jury selection to be very tough in a case like that. It would have to be almost ironclad.
Yep. Agreed. Let's see. We answered that.
Little half breed. That's funny.
Oh, little half breed. Looking at questions here. Fire questions. Let's see. I don't know what Gangster for Life said that got deleted, but thank you for doing so. I know it's old. Jeff Kean said, I know it's old, but I didn't catch it the first 4 times I watched it. And by the way, I got to send a special shout out to Jeff Kean. Jeff, you thank you for being on the show. I want to send a special shout out. I mean, I actually saw a back and forth on one of the YouTube videos that you did, and I want to say thank you personally for forming your own opinions. You're your own man. Nobody tells you how to think. Nobody tells you what to think. But I'm glad that you actually saw through it, because there are people that are out there right now just to cause fights. That's all they want to do. And if you don't agree with their point of view, for whatever reason, they go to despicable levels to try to, say things and do things to you. And really all they're doing is just showing how low class they really are. So thank you for that, dude. And welcome to the show. Keep watching. And, again, Jesse will tell you, we're into a healthy discussion here. We're not here just so that everybody can bow to the altar of what we believe. If you've got something that you want to say or challenge us to do something, please do. But thank you for repping us out in the field. We really appreciate it.
Supreme had asked a question. He wanted to know about the meeting with George Kalisis. Was that at his house where George told him not to carry firearms, or was it Reggie? And what's your take on how much George was involved?
Well, George Kalisis was he represented the ownership interest in Club 662 by a woman by the name of Helen Thomas. Helen Thomas had a gangster husband. He was actually real mob. And Helen Thomas's husband owned Club 662. It was kind of a mob hangout, kind of a mob getaway spot. It was off the strip. They could go there and they could meet, and they weren't really under any kind of prying eyes, and they were away from the public. That's why Club 662 sits so far off the strip. When Thomas, I think Frank was his name or something, whenever Helen Thomas's husband died, he left that club to her. And she really was like, well, what am I going to do with the club? Well, we all know George Kalisis was, kind of a mob attorney. He's been very dusted up with members of organized crime, represented them in different places. And George Kalisis represented Helen Thomas. And she really was not interested in keeping the club. She wanted to sell it. But the problem is you can't really have a nightclub and not have a liquor license, because what are you going to do? You can sit around and play shuffleboard all day. So when Helen Thomas, Suge Knight came up and David Kenner made an offer to run, manage, and then eventually own Club 662, George Kalisis got involved. Now, George Kalisis got involved on that level, but he was also, personally representing the interests of Helen Thomas, and he was not necessarily representing the interests of Death Row. However, when you go and you have a meeting at an attorney's office and you're discussing things that are involved with anything to do with Club 662 or anything to do with disarming the bodyguards or anything to do with what's going to happen that night, all of that information is protected under what's called attorney-client privilege. So theoretically, and I know this sounds like a crazy example, but I could sit in a movie theater and fill it full of 500 people, and if the attorney is there and he's talking and it's understood by everybody in that room that this is the attorney for this, and this attorney gives advice to everybody and tells everybody do or don't do something, that information is protected under attorney-client privilege, which means that no one in that room has to testify about anything, and the attorney that's in that room cannot testify because he would be giving up his client's privilege or his client's secrecy. So that's why they did it. They did it at George Kalisis's office. There was a meeting there. Death Row Dave, who was Suge's driver, said they had a second meeting later on that day at the hotel. And that was news to us. We had never heard that before. But that there was actually a second meeting, and in that meeting they were actually talking to a lot of the off-duty cops, and even in that meeting they were told not to carry their weapons. But the key people that were involved, and again, why do you have a meeting in an attorney's office? You have a meeting in an attorney's office so that it's confidential, but it's also recorded because everybody was there, everybody, walked in the door, the attorney knows who was there and who wasn't there. And so if it ever came a matter of accountability, like, well, didn't we tell you not to carry your weapon? You shot this person. We told you not to carry your weapon. No, you never said that. Well, yeah, you did, because you were at the attorney's office, and here's the attorney to prove that. He's testifying that you have that information and that you were warned not to do something, but you did it anyway. So there's a couple of really compelling reasons to go do stuff with an attorney, but the most important one, again, I guess, is that, that cloud of secrecy, because had people not talked about that meeting, would we have ever known it happened? So that's kind of what's important with George Kalisis. And the other thing about George Kalisis that's important is that George Kalisis is also at least he was for years, the head of the board of directors. He's kind of like the president of the board of directors for the Friends of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, which is their booster club. In other words, they raise money for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. In other words, they give money. George Kalisis runs an organization that gives money to the Las Vegas Police Department. And George Kalisis was involved with telling the guards not to carry weapons that night. So how much investigation do you really think Las Vegas is going to do into the guy who runs the organization that gives them money? Anybody watch Breaking Bad knows that Gus Fring, the bad guy, the chicken man in Breaking Bad, what was the number one thing he was doing? He was going to the police departments and giving them money as a charitable thing. He was going to the fire departments and giving them money. It was all in the name of charity. And he did that so that they wouldn't be looking at what he was doing. They wouldn't be looking at his operations. So, clearly art imitates life. Clearly that's not something that was unique to George, Kalisis, because the people at Breaking Bad did it. And again, art imitates life. So that's kind of how that went down. That's the story about George Kalisis. Oh, and one other thing. I'll drop something that nobody knows. There's a company by the name of Mookie Management, and it's actually in the Las Vegas logs when they went to go check the bar licenses and they were interviewing people after the shooting happened. There was a company out of New York called Mookie Management, and Mookie Management brought their people in to run that club, and nobody was happy about it. Well, Mookie Management was actually a company that was owned by David Kenner. And so it really does actually tie David Kenner into the whole Club 662. And could he have run Club 662? Was he really buying it for Suge? Well, that kind of is the question now, because Mookie Management was the one that was actually trying to buy the club. Mookie Management was the one that was given the applied for the liquor license. Suge Knight really wasn't around, so maybe Suge was a silent partner in it, but because of his criminal record, he stayed out of it. But at the end of the day, it was really David Kenner applying for the license under that company, Mookie Management. But strangely enough, all of a sudden, all these people from New York who had interest in other nightclubs start showing up at Club 662 and running the operations at Club 662. So it really is kind of weird that you've got this New York mob kind of thing where people are coming in and running, Club 662 until you understand that, David Cantor represented the Giovanni's crime family. Okay? He represented people that were not good people. I think that was the Giovanni's family. I could be wrong about the name of the family, but it was a mob family. And he was a mob attorney. So, when you have people from New York coming in to run the business of Club 662 under this Mookie management, that's something that's never come up in the investigation. While that might seem like kind of a trivial tidbit, it actually has a lot to do with that thought of if we took Suge Knight out, could we still continue to do the operations of Death Row? Sure. If we took Suge Knight out, could you continue to do the operations of Club 662? Sure. All these moves are being made kind of around Suge Knight so that if he's suddenly removed from the equation, what's left? Everything still goes on. Everything runs. Nothing changes. Because Suge Knight's suddenly gone, he doesn't leave a hole in his wake. So that's kind of what's important about Mookie Management. We could never really get into it. Thank you. Yeah, that nice headband. Why don't you tell me, Jeff? My friggin' headset's falling off my face.
I figured that was you was just rocking it that way.
No, yeah, that's my new style.
But moving on from that, someone said, I wanted to address Gary Jones. He said, do you guys agree with Daz said about Reggie telling on the postal workers? He said, Suge next. I want to say this. Daz Dillinger is getting that information from information that RJ Bond is giving me and I'm putting out on YouTube. It's my understanding that it wasn't Reggie telling on the postal workers in that video. The postal worker, the Operation Mr. Postman, was before Reggie Wright's indictment. Could you fill him in on that, RJ? Because I think Daz Dillinger has his information wrong because he's watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, what else is new? Have another joint. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there was an FBI operation. I mean, mind you, they had been surveilling Reggie Wright for years. But while they were also surveilling them, there was another operation called Operation Wait a Minute, Mr. Postman. And I know it sounds like a silly name, but it's kind of funny. They were tracking shipments of drugs that were coming in and out of the U.S. Post Office. And the people that were involved, a couple of people like O.B. Hillard and some of the other people that were involved in that operation were also involved in Reggie Wright's operation because they were part of the Great Street Crips. I mean, there's clearly a crossover connection that relates the two investigations together. Now, again, I can't confirm this right now. We're waiting to get confirmation on it. We had a source that told us that there was actually another very, very large raid that happened last week at the end of the week and before the weekend. We're still waiting to get confirmation on it. Sometimes these things are hard to get confirmation on because if they raid someplace, it's not like the place they raided are going to go call the news and say, hey, we just got raided by the cops. When raids happen, and this was what happened with the Compton PD raids when they went to go find Orlando Anderson, generally speaking, the police departments make a decision on whether or not they're going to raid the place privately or whether or not they're going to want the news media there to actually be there when they make the raid. And so in the case of Compton, of course, they want to make a big show out of it, so they invited all the media to come down, and it was a big circus. Occasionally, like with what happened with the Reggie Wrights, they didn't invite the news media to come down when they showed up at 4 a.m. at Reggie's house and woke him up out of bed and hauled his ass away and searched his house. They didn't invite the media. And if the media is not there and something happens, it's kind of the tree falls in the woods thing, that nobody's going to know. So if this place got raided by the FBI and the FBI has not put out a press release about it because maybe they don't want the press and they don't want the public to know that they've done it yet until they get some more information on it, then a week later maybe they'll make it known. Or it's just not on the news cycle radar. A whole thing can go down. I mean, 24 people can be indicted and it may not make any news at all. So we're waiting to get confirmation of it. I understand that there was, and it would involve not the U.S. Post Office, but another mail carrier that did the same kind of service as the Post Office, where a bunch of people got raided. And that's why the federal government right now is very tight-lipped about everything that's going on. And, of course, We said this, Jesse, didn't we? We said there were going to be waves. Once they started the first prosecution, that there were going to be more and more waves about it. So, you got to understand that that's kind of how the federal government works when they prosecute these cases. They get information, they arrest a bunch of people, somebody gives up more information, they go arrest a bunch of people more, somebody gives up more information, they arrest a bunch of people more. So, whether or not Reggie was the one who gave them up, and that was part of why his motion for a continued arraignment was sealed by the federal government, maybe that's the reason why, maybe it had to do with that bust. But that's part of the reason why we're having trouble getting that information, is because it's hard to get right now, because they've got it all buttoned up right now as they're continuing to keep making arrests in this ongoing investigation. So that's kind of the net of that with wait a minute, Operation Mr. Postman, or whatever the hell it's called.
Thank you for the clarification. Yeah. Daz is watching. I've given him an open opportunity and invitation to come interview.
Again. Where's Kenner? Well, Kenner's still practicing law. He's still at his law office. I think he's still in Encino, California. He's still practicing law. He showed up at Suge's one of Suge's hearings just recently when Suge was complaining to the judge that he couldn't get a hold of his attorneys, and he said that Kenner was his attorney again, which is really interesting because he had fired Kenner by that time already. And the question is why can't Kenner be investigated? Well, see, that's the thing about attorneys. Attorneys are officers of the court. It's kind of like asking the church to investigate its own priests. When you're an attorney, you have a certain amount of immunity from prosecution for certain things because you're being asked to do a job in the best interest of the court. Sure, are attorneys investigated? Sure, they are. But when it comes down to making an allegation or making an arrest, or how culpable are you? Because if Jesse and I are talking and I say I did something, I killed somebody, or I did something, well, like remember, Jesse, when we were in Texas and I told you that I killed Tupac? Okay, remember that? Well, if it was just regular people and I told Jesse that I did something, well, he's got that information, which may or may not make him an accessory after the fact. But with an attorney, if you tell an attorney and he's your attorney and you confess to doing something really wrong, that attorney can't be held liable in court for as an accessory because he had knowledge of it. That's his job. So that's one way of explaining how attorneys have certain immunity. So it makes it very, very difficult to go after an attorney just because, they're an attorney. They can show up in court, defend themselves, and do the things they want to do, and they know the law better than a lot of law enforcement officers do. And the other thing is, again, because they all do business with each other and they all live in the same courtroom, it's kind of hard to chase after the guy you just went to lunch with the other day. So from a practical standpoint, that's why it hasn't ever happened. And I agree. JHot247, welcome to the show. I totally agree. He was his lawyer and he was never been questioned. Again, we don't know, because we don't have all the Vegas documents, if he was questioned. I'm sure they probably didn't question him very much at all, if at all. They probably didn't. But we don't know. We can't say they never did because we don't have all the files. So, I'm sure they probably didn't get anywhere by asking him because he would just say, hey, I don't have to tell you anything. It's attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, Kenner would never talk. He would never talk. And even the only one person he could really talk on would be Tupac specifically, because he's dead. But does the attorney-client privilege cover that as well? Could he still hide behind that, RJ, even with a dead client?
Yeah, absolutely. The attorney is not compelled. The only time that an attorney is compelled, or maybe compelled, is kind of like a doctor, is if in his opinion, and that's the important thing, it's not really the fact, but in his opinion, if he feels that client is a danger to himself or to somebody else, he is compelled or should be compelled to testify or to give up that information to law enforcement. However, most attorneys, when they even with a guy like Suge Knight, just say, well, I don't think he was really that big a threat. He's just misunderstood. And there you go. That he's off the hook. Again, a lot of latitude. So Danny Romero, with Wright Jr. and Suge in the positions they're in, does anything get brought forward by them in an attempt to save their own asses? The answer to that question is absolutely. I can't tell you this for sure because I have absolutely no knowledge of what's happening with either one of them in this case in terms of what they're telling other people or what they're telling their attorneys. And I can't even trust the word of the attorneys anymore because I had an attorney tell us a bunch of shit and then he turned around publicly and denied he ever said it. So, that's how much I trust anything coming out of that camp. So when an attorney, let me step back for a minute. Yeah, I think to answer the question, dude, I feel like I've been smoking something. I can't keep my head straight. At the end of the day, yeah, they are going to give up information to try to save their own asses, okay, one way or another, because they don't want to go to jail. Now, would that information be about the murders of Tupac and Biggie? Probably not. Because again, as we showed in Battle for Compton, and those of you who watched the movie now can understand what we were talking about, the problem with the money laundering and the drug dealing was happening long before there was a Tupac or a Biggie. And if you understand Jada Pinkett Smith and her latest bullshit revelation that she was a drug dealer now, clearly the drugs and the drug dealing were around long before there was a Tupac and a Biggie. So we laid that out in Battle for Compton. We put that out there. And again, if they're going to give information out that would be relevant to something that's going on right now, and it's sad for Tupac fans, I get that. It's sad for me, too. I'm a Tupac fan, too. It's sad for me. But it is information that's going to be about the drug trafficking and money laundering that's happening right now. Let's see.
I'm not faded. It's a shadow. I'm sunburnt.
Shadow from the hat.
And the fart gun is silent, but deadly.
Yeah, we haven't been putting out the fart gun. I mean, it's still here. I still have it. It's still right there. But no, we haven't been using it a lot because
Tupac money ain't buying batteries for that thing. It's just
that's right. No matter what you think. And that, by the way, let's squelch another rumor that we had squelched. And Jesse, actually, if you still have a copy of the show, I'd like to pull it out where it was actually said on the record live with a real audience and of our fans and people on the live show. No, I do not owe Michael Carlin tens of thousands of dollars. Let's just get that out there, okay? He came on the show. He cleared that up himself. There's no big debt owed to him. If he's telling other people that's what they're saying. That's not what came out of his mouth on the show when we talked about it. Okay, so no, the answer to the question is I do not owe Michael Carlin money. I did not fuck Russ Poole out of any money or his family. None of that happened. I have a good relationship with the Poole family, and that has just simply not happened. So let's address that too, because I know that information has come out there, and normally I don't even bother with things that are just bullshit, but. If people are starting to believe that might be truth because I'm not speaking about it, I got no problem speaking on it. So let's put that out there.
Super excited for Labyrinth. Can't wait. I hope that they put it out towards the end of the year. Super excited for that film.
Yeah, Labyrinth's going to be a good show. We're still in contact with the people involved with it. I think it's going to do great justice to Russ. It's going to be good for his legacy. Good for kind of standing up the name of a guy who's had his name run into the ground and had his name, I mean, I had to say it like this, but had his name kind of whored out, because, you have to differentiate what Russ Poole investigated and what he came up with and what his theories were versus what is being said or done in his name. And credit that he's being given for things that he may not have actually, he may know the broad strokes, like Randall Sullivan says. He may know the broad strokes about things, but he himself did not come up with that. And it's kind of interesting to me because I'm actually seeing Russ's name being used in conjunction with some pretty out there things. And for as much as I knew Russ, I can't say whether or not he truly believed some of the stuff that's being kind of said in his name. But honestly, Russ was a pretty hardcore guy. He didn't jump on a lot of fantasy bandwagons about stuff. So, I can't say that, but I think this movie is going to be honest about Russ. I think they're going to go to a great effort to make Russ the guy that he was. And we did an interview just recently, and somebody brought up the point that, and it needs to be said, part of the reason that Russ and I got along so well, especially the beginning, and I got all the emails to back all this up, if anybody ever wanted to care, the reason that Russ Poole and I got together was because Russ was not the Tupac Shakur investigator. Again, that's something that a lot of people are trying to bootstrap Russ's name to. Russ knew about the Tupac case because he kind of had to get involved with it because he started seeing ties between the Biggie and the Tupac case, and he needed to understand the Tupac case enough to understand what connection there might be to the Biggie case. But Russ Poole was not the Tupac Shakur investigator. He was not the guy assigned to investigate the Tupac Shakur case. He knew about it because he took away what he thought was relevant to that. Now, on the other side of it, I did 2 Tupac assassination movies. I didn't get into Biggie at all. That's all we focused on, and I didn't want to get involved with the Biggie part of it because I just thought there was too much information out there, and I wasn't as familiar about it. So when Russ Poole saw the assassination movies and he saw how much work we had done, Frank Alexander and I had done into getting the information out there about the Tupac investigation, he saw how much it shored up what he had already believed about the Biggie investigation and how it related to Tupac, and we joined like that. We just kind of synced up and meshed, and the two worlds kind of came together, and they really complemented each other. And that was something that Russ and I talked about a lot, that it was just great kismet. It was great timing when people come together and they're able to make that bridge. I'm over here, he's over here, and we bridge that gap, and we could come together and do a book like 187, which really talked in detail about both cases, not just one or the other, because I had done Tupac, they'd done Biggie, but again, a lot's being said. Oh, Russ Poole came up with all these things about Tupac, and that's not just Russ Poole's a genius. He's, I love the guy. He was a hero. I mean, he was my hero, but Russ was not the Tupac investigator. Russ knew about the Tupac case, and he could make opinions and start to work through with 187 and his conversations with myself and Michael about how the two cases, synced up and things that he said, that makes kind of sense because of this, that, and the other. But we really need to make sure that we keep our facts straight about things, and that's really important. And again, Jesse, I'm not sitting here trying to pump myself up. That's not what this is about. That's not why this conversation took place. I know people are going to say, RJ just trying to put himself out there to be the man. No, I'm trying to explain where everybody fit together and why Russ Poole and I synced up so well. That's it.
Right on. And then to reply to just because it's an actual film, it's starring Johnny Depp. They're saying Johnny Depp gave the performance of his life. So we're seeing if it will air before the end of the year. Usually they'll try to get a screener out in December to meet the next Academy Awards. So I as soon as I know, I'll tell you, but I'm super excited for it. And to answer all about Asia, I'll be watching the Snap doc on Oxygen, and I probably will do a live stream right after it just for thoughts and opinions. What about you, RJ? You gonna watch the Snap doc on Oxygen channel?
What Snap doc?
It's about Death Row and Tupac. There's a couple little mini projects coming out. One of them being Tupac knowing who killed him. I just saw the article today. I'd have to do some further digging on that, but there's a lot of
it's exciting. Yeah, I'll probably watch it at some point. I'm not going to be sitting in front of my TV. I mean, Narcos just came out, so I've been watching that. I'm binge watching Narcos, and to me, that's ultimately interesting. I mean, honestly, most of the stuff, somebody's going to tell me something. I mean, I had somebody call me just the other day, and it was actually somebody that's working with a television show and on a Tupac project, and he called me up with this information, and he was like, wow, this is so great. Can you believe it? Doesn't it just give you chills? And I said, no, I've already read that. I already been there, done that. It's like, wow, that was new information to them, but it wasn't new information to me. So, you'd be surprised when I watch these documentaries that come out about different parts like Death Row Records and things like that, where to them, the people in Hollywood or the people that made the documentary, this all may be like new, shocking information about it. But at the end of the day, it's like, really? Now we heard that fucking 5 years ago. Welcome to the club. Like I said, people wake up now and have an opinion on the matter. But this information's been out there for 20 years. So it may be new to them, and they're putting it out that it's new, but really, to people who know about it, it may not be new at all. So I'll catch it, but it's not a priority.
Is season 3 out?
Narcos, yes, it dropped September 1. That's why I'm binge watching it.
Yes.
Watching about the Cali cartel and
Yeah.
their operations right after Pablo Escobar, and how that moves into the Juarez cartel. And of course, by the time it gets to the Juarez cartel in Mexico, now we've got our pipeline to California, into Los Angeles, into Compton. So, it'd be very interesting to see how that all comes out. They were talking about how the Cali cartel in their heyday was shipping 180 tons of cocaine into the United States every 6 months. 30 tons a month were coming into the United States. And, their payroll just on payoffs was $1 billion. Just in payoffs.
Apparently Reggie had a high demand for it. Zing! Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Go ahead and take one more. I'm not trying to cut it short, RJ, but we hit the magic number, and like a little boy, I have to potty.
Oh, okay. Well, it's because of all that beer you drank.
Probably.
Let's see. Big Frank and I, Chi-Chi's Jamie, I would like to speak regarding Big Frank. Okay. Yeah, please give Jesse a call. Let's talk about that, see what you had to say. Oh, is that okay? Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So Daz is putting the joint back up to my lips again. Yeah, probably. Danny, you're welcome. The reason that we streamed the movie again, because I really truly believe, unlike Dorsey and people that kind of dismissed it right out of hand, I heard it said, I think it was Lex Luthor who said that there are people that can read War and Peace and think it's just a good book. And there are other people that can read the contents of a chewing gum wrapper and unlock the mysteries of the universe. Okay? There are people that would watch a movie like Battle for Compton, and by the way, the review from Blu-ray.com's up there and said that it was actually a good, well, technically done movie. So it kind of shows you what Dorsey's opinion when he said it wasn't a very well done movie. Blu-ray.com disagrees with him, so you can decide who you'd rather believe, the people who review Blu-rays or Mike Dorsey, because they definitely have alternative points of view. But at the end of the day, what the hell was I talking about? I don't even remember what I was talking about anymore.
Something about
the reason we streamed it. Yeah, no, the reason we streamed it. I'm just going down 10 different paths today. The reason that we streamed the DVD again is because there's so much information in there. You have to watch it 3 and 4 times, because every time you watch it, you're going to get something else. Because it is very hard to read a document, hear what somebody's saying, and read a subtitle underneath it. It's very hard to do that, and if you're not going to just stop and rewind and stop and rewind, you have to watch it. And I'm sure that people can probably speak up that watched it a second time or a third time that they've picked up things they didn't pick up the first time around, or the second time they've seen it. And that's cool, because if you keep going back to the well and pulling up new information, then that makes the value of the product that you bought or rented even better, because each time you watch it, it gives back. It gives you something new. So that's what I'm thinking.
I liked it. I sat here and watched it with everybody else. And you're right. There are parts that you catch, and I've seen it probably, at least 10 times.
Okay, Michael West said, "Do you think Michael Moore was murdered?" Let me just get this right out there. No, I don't believe he was. I don't believe there was. And again, I didn't investigate his case. I know what I know about it. I've talked to the people that were involved with it. I think that the circumstances around his death were certainly unusual. They were maybe suspicious. It's sad that he was dead, but I don't believe that Michael Moore was murdered. I don't believe that, because it's inconsistent with other facts and other things that we know about when people were killed, why they were killed, and how they were killed, and the method of which these things were not. It's just not consistent with it. So, could it have happened? Sure, it could. But I personally, I don't think he was. I think that, and I don't think that he was killed in relation to the Tupac case. I don't.
To answer Yeezy 808, he wants to know how Dre and Iveen got HD footage of Pac at the MGM, because most of that footage was shot in 32 millimeter. And it's
No. The reason, how did they get HD footage? Here's what they did. They had video footage at standard definition, and they went to a company in Hollywood that does what they call an Archimedes upgrade. It's a digital upgrade where they take a standard definition footage, like the footage I have on my computer of the MGM was digitized is 480. That's standard definition. When you can go to a company and you can pay them, and it's about $500 an hour for it, and they will take your content and they will up-res it from standard definition to high definition. So the reason that they had high definition footage of the MGM cameras, not because they got any new footage, there was nothing new, there was no original source material that they went to. They took standard definition footage, they went and paid the people to do an Archimedes HD upgrade like we've done for other things on our projects, and that's how you have HD footage. Technically speaking, the footage that we have in Battle for Compton is HD footage of the MGM footage. Okay, and again, depending on whether or not it's a software encoder or a hardware encoder and how this data is upgraded and up-res to HD is what the quality of the image is. Something you might be able to do on your computer versus something a professional agency that does post-production or HD up-resing with an Archimedes system leaves a much, much clearer, much more high resolution. Now, they can't put things there that weren't there originally. So if somebody's in the original footage, you can't tell what color somebody's eyes are, you're not suddenly going to, Archimedes isn't going to suddenly make them have green eyes because somehow that's just what they think. I mean, it doesn't work like that. If it's a standard def footage, it's going to be a better looking standard def footage that they call HD. But there's a difference between true HD, source HD, and up-res or Archimedes up-resed HD. So that's how that came out.
I was unaware of that process. I just know they can take it from stock film sometimes.
Well, no, we were going to do that. That was one of the things we were doing with Before I Wake with Frank Alexander's movie. That entire movie is standard definition, and what we wanted to do with it is we had other interviews that were HD, so we were going to take the legacy parts from Before I Wake, and we were going to pay a company, it was $500 an hour, to go in and actually make an HD upgrade of the entire base movie, and that would allow us to put in our HD footage and release a new HD product. That's how that works. So that's a little bit behind the scenes, but that's how it works. So, Gary, good. Thank you for the compliments. We'll see you same bat time, same bat channel, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. And let's see here. One last thing, and then I'm going to jump.
I just want to give a special thank you to everybody that checked out the movie. I hope you liked it, and thanks for coming on the live stream. RJ's going to close us out with a last question.
With the spiritual hymn, with a gospel great. No, let's see. As big as Pac was, why did he not have a funeral? I don't understand that. Tyrell Love, good question. I don't understand that. That's like this Yeezy diamond, and then there's no funeral. It's just crazy. That's a very personal decision that a family makes. Sometimes social organizations and social gatherings can get together and they can be ugly. They can be messy because there's just a lot of people there, and some people have differing. I mean, what was that funeral that just happened in Long Beach that Snoop Dogg was involved with, and it turned into a ruckus? What was that funeral?
I forgot. It's the Ricky Harris.
Yeah. So you look at that turned into a big melee. I mean, and the family doesn't want that. They don't want the casket tipped over while people are fighting or something like that. That would be embarrassing. So I think there's a lot of good reasons why not to have it. I mean, they should have had a much bigger memorial service afterwards, but I put that on death row. I put that on Reggie Wright and people like that who claim that they love Pac and thought that he was such a great guy that they actually didn't do something for it. I mean, you look at what they did with the Michael Jackson tribute. I mean, they rented out a whole stadium and did a big tribute show there. I mean, there was a lot of fans that would have shown up for something like that, but I mean, they did it for Biggie. It can be done. But there may have been some considerations in that as well, and Afeni just didn't want to have that done. That's not how she was as a person. So that's the best I can say. Anyway, Jess, it's been awesome. It's been good, as always. Good to see you. Excuse me. And, guys, thank you for tuning in. We had some. Go tell your friends. Go. If you got questions, you want to get into it, let's get down to the heart of the matter. Let's get down to the discussions. Let's find out about Little Half Dead. Let's find out about the patents. Let's get these guys out there. Let's get them talking. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
I appreciate it, RJ, and thank you guys for checking it out. Right on.